TV. I now call the Prime Minister to make a statement. Boris Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I share your gratitude to the House of Commons staff, Mr. Speaker, for all their efforts, their hard work to allow us to meet today in the way that we are. And before I begin my statement, I'd like also to say that I know the thoughts of the whole House will be with the Honourable Member for Cardiff Central, who is currently in hospital with COVID, and we wish her a full and speedy recovery. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'll make a statement about the measures we're taking to defeat this new variant of COVID-19, protecting our NHS whilst it carries out vaccinations that will finally free us from this wretched virus. And, Mr. Speaker, there is a fundamental difference between the regulations before the House today and the position we faced at any previous stage, because we now have the vaccines that are our means of escape, and we will use every available second of the lockdown to place this invisible shield around the elderly and the vulnerable. Already, with Pfizer and Oxford AstraZeneca combined, we have immunised over 1.1 million people in England, over 1.3 million in the UK. Our NHS is following the plan drawn up by the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, which is aimed at saving the most lives in the fastest possible time. And given that the average age of COVID fatalities is over 80, it is significant that we've already vaccinated more than 650,000 people in this age group, meaning that within 2 to 3 weeks, almost 1 in 4 of the most vulnerable groups will all have a significant degree of immunity. By February 15th, the NHS is committed to offering a vaccination to everyone in the top 4 priority groups, including older care home residents and staff, everyone over 70, all frontline NHS and care staff, and all those who are clinically extremely vulnerable. And in working towards that target, there are already almost 1,000 vaccination centres across the country, including 595 GP-led sites, with a further 180 opening later this week, and 107 hospital sites with another 100 later this week. Next week, we will also have 7 vaccination centres opening in places such as sports stadia and exhibition centres. Pharmacies are already working with GPs to deliver the vaccine in many areas of the country, and I'm grateful to Brigadier Prosser, who is leading the efforts of our armed forces in supporting this vaccine rollout. We've already vaccinated more people in this country than in the rest of Europe combined, and we will give the House the maximum possible transparency about our acceleration of this effort, publishing daily updates online from Monday, so that jab by jab, honourable members can scrutinise the progress being made every single day. Yet, as we take this giant leap towards finally overcoming the virus and reclaiming our lives, we have to contend with the new variant, which is between 50 and 70% more contagious. The old variant, which the House agreed last month, the tiers that the House agreed last month, was working with the old variant, but alas, this mutation, spreading with frightening ease and speed, in spite of the sterling work of the British public, this mutation has led to more cases than we've seen ever before, numbers that, alas, cannot be explained away by the meteoric rise in testing. When the Office of National Statistics reports that more than 2% of the population is now infected, and when the number of patients in hospitals in England is now 40% higher than the first peak in April, it is inescapable that the facts are changing and we must change our response. And so we have no choice but to return to a national lockdown in England, with similar measures being adopted by the devolved administrations, so we can control this new variant until we can take the most likely victims out of its path with vaccines. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, will open the debate on the full regulations shortly. But the key point, I'm afraid, is that once again we are instructing people to stay at home, everyone to stay at home, leaving only for limited reasons permitted by law, such as to shop for essentials, to work if people absolutely cannot work from home, to exercise, to seek medical assistance such as getting a COVID test or to escape injury or harm, including domestic abuse. We're advising the clinically extremely vulnerable to begin shielding again. And because we must do everything possible to stop the spread of the disease, we've asked schools and colleges to close their doors to all except vulnerable children and those of critical workers. Mr. Speaker, I don't think the House will be in any doubt about our determination, my determination, to keep schools open, especially primary schools, open for as long as possible, because all the evidence shows that school is the best place for our children. And indeed, all the evidence shows that schools are safe and that the risk posed to children by coronavirus is vanishingly small. For most children, the most dangerous part of going to school, even in the midst of a global pandemic, remains, I'm afraid, crossing the road in order to get there. But the data showed, and our scientific advisors agreed, that our efforts to contain the spread of this new variant would not be sufficient if schools continued to act as a vector or a potential vector for spreading the virus between households. Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will join me in paying tribute to all the teachers, all the pupils and parents who are now making the rapid move to remote learning, and we will do everything possible to support that process, building on the 560,000 laptops and tablets provided last year, with over 50,000 delivered to schools on Monday and more than 100,000 being delivered in total during the first week of term. We have partnered with some of the UK's leading mobile operators to provide free mobile data to disadvantaged families to support access to education resources. And I'm very grateful to EE, 3, Tesco Mobile, Smarty, Sky Mobile, Virgin Mobile and Vodafone for supporting this offer. Oak National Academy will continue to provide video lessons, and it's very good news that the BBC is launching the biggest education programme in its history, with both primary and secondary school programmes across its platforms. We recognise it will not be possible or fair for all exams to go ahead this summer as normal, and the Education Secretary will be making a statement shortly. Mr. Speaker, I know many people will ask whether the decision on schools could have been reached sooner, and the answer is that we've been doing everything in our power to keep them open, because children's education is too vital and their futures too precious to be disrupted until every other avenue, every other option has been closed off and every other course of action has been taken. And that's why schools were the very last thing to close, as I've long promised that they would be. And when we begin to move out of lockdown, I promise that they will be the very first things to reopen. That moment may come after the February half-term, although we should remain extremely cautious about the timetable ahead. And as was the case last spring, our emergence from the lockdown cocoon will not be a big bang, Mr. Speaker, but a gradual unwrapping. That is why the legislation this House will vote on later today runs until the 31st of March, not because we expect the full national lockdown to continue until then, but to allow a steady, controlled and evidence-led move down through the tiers on a regional basis, carefully, brick by brick, as it were, breaking free of our confinement, but without risking the hard-won gains that our protections have given us. These restrictions will be kept under continuous review, with a statutory requirement to review every 2 weeks and a legal obligation to remove them if they are no longer deemed necessary to limit the transmission of the virus. And for as long as restrictions are in place, we will continue to support everyone affected by them, from the continued provision of free school meals to the £4.6 billion of additional assistance for our retail, hospitality and leisure sectors announced by my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, yesterday. Mr. Speaker, we are in a tough final stretch, made only tougher by the new variant, but this country will come together. And the miracle of scientific endeavour, much of it right here in the UK, has given us not only the sight of the finish line, but a clear route to get there. After the marathon of last year, we are indeed now in a sprint, a race to vaccinate the vulnerable faster than the virus can reach them. And every needle in every arm makes a difference. As I say, we're already vaccinating faster than every comparable country, and that rate, I hope, will only increase. But if we're going to win this race for our population, we have to give our army of vaccinators the biggest head start we possibly can. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, to do that, we must once again stay at home, protect the NHS and save lives. And I commend this statement to the House.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement and for his telephone call on Monday to update me. Can I also thank him for his kind words about the Honourable Member for Cardiff Central. She is still in hospital, but I'm happy to say that she is now improving. I also want to thank everybody on our NHS and on the front line for all the work they're doing at the moment in the most stressful of circumstances. The situation we face is clearly very serious, perhaps the darkest moment of the pandemic. The virus is out of control. Over 1 million people in England now have COVID. The number of hospital admissions is rising. Tragically, so are the numbers of people dying. And it's only the early days of January, and the NHS is under huge strain. In those circumstances, tougher restrictions are necessary. We will support them, we will vote for them, and urge everybody to comply with the new rules. Stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives. But this is not just bad luck. It's not inevitable. It follows a pattern. In the first wave of the pandemic, the government was repeatedly too slow to act. And we ended 2020 with one of the highest death tolls in Europe and the worst hit economy of major economies. In the early summer, a government report called Preparing for a Challenging Winter warned of the risk of a second wave, of the virus mutating, and of the NHS being overwhelmed. It set out the preparations the government needed to take. I put that report to the Prime Minister at PMQs in July. Throughout the autumn, track and trace didn't work. SAGE advised a circuit break in September, but the Prime Minister delayed for weeks before acting. We had a tiered system that didn't work. And then we had the debacle of the delayed decision to change the rules on mixing at Christmas. The most recent advice about the situation we're now in was given on the 22nd of December, but no action was taken for 2 weeks until Monday of this week. Mr. Speaker, these are the decisions that have led us to the position we are now in. And the vaccine is now the only way out. And we must all support the national effort to get it rolled out as quickly as possible. We will do whatever we can to support the government on this. We were the first country to get the vaccine. Let's be the first country to roll out that vaccine programme. But we need a plan to work to. The Prime Minister has given some indication in the last few days, but can he tell the House exactly what the plan is? Can the NHS deliver 2 million vaccines a week? I think they can. I hope they can. But do they have the resources and support to do so? And we will support that, of course. Will there be sufficient doses available week on week to get us to the 14 million doses by mid-February? What can we do to help? It's vital that that happens. I'm glad to hear that high street pharmacies will be helping. Can we use volunteers in support of this national effort? Let me turn to financial support. Yesterday's announcement will help, but the British Chamber of Commerce and others have already warned it's not enough. There are big gaps and big questions. First, why is there still nothing to help the 3 million self-employed who've been excluded from the very start? That was unfair in March of last year. It was even more unfair in the autumn. It's totally unforgivable now. It may well be a whole year that that group have gone without any meaningful support. That gap needs to be plugged. Secondly, will the Prime Minister drop his plan to cut universal credit by £20 a week? That needs to be done now, and we will support it. Will he immediately end extend the eviction ban. That's due to run out just in 5 days' time now, just as we're going in to this new phase. Third, will he address the obvious issues with financial support for those required to isolate, including statutory sick pay and support for local councils? And will the Prime Minister finally recognise that now is the worst possible time to freeze pay for our key workers? On schools, we all recognise the huge damage that closing schools will cause for many children and families. But the Prime Minister knew that closures might be necessary, so there should always have been a contingency plan. Up to 1.8 million children don't have access to a home computer, and 900,000 children live in households that rely on mobile internet connections. So can the Prime Minister tell us, when is the government going to get the laptops to those that need them? He's spoken about the 50,000 delivered and the 100,000 more, but 1.8 million children don't have access to a home computer. So there's real urgency needed now as we go into these weeks. I welcome what the Prime Minister said about telecoms companies cutting the cost of online learning. It's vital that they do so. I'm assuming that's happening straight away because we can't delay there. And will the Prime Minister be straight about what's going to happen with exams this year? We cannot leave this until months down the line. In particular, and very pressing now, for those who are meant to be taking their BTEC exams in the next few days. Surely they must just be cancelled. Some leadership on this is desperately needed. Next, Mr. Speaker, our borders. The Prime Minister knows there's real concern about the rapid transmission of this disease. There are new strains being detected in South Africa, Denmark and elsewhere. The quarantine system isn't working. The Prime Minister said yesterday that we will be bringing in extra measures at the border. I have to ask, why are those measures not introduced already? They've been briefed to the media for days, but nothing has happened. Mr. Speaker, this is the third time the country's been asked to close its doors. We need to make sure it's the last. We will support the Prime Minister and the government in these measures. We will carry the message and do whatever is asked of us. But we will demand that the Prime Minister keeps his side of the bargain. Use this latest lockdown to support families, protect businesses and get the vaccine rolled out as quickly and safely as possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, I thank you, the right honourable gentleman, who I think made some sensible points there, in addition to some slightly party political ones. And I just say on the political points, I think it is worth remembering that the waves of coronavirus that we've seen across Western Europe in the last few weeks, I'm afraid, we are also seeing here with the additional pressure, Mr. Speaker, of the new variant of the virus. I think most people do understand that. He asked about support for the self-employed, and we've already given, I think, 13.7 billion to help the self-employed in particular, as part of a massive package of support for jobs and livelihoods across the whole of the UK, totalling 260 billion. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to support families through universal credit. There's been an uplift, as he knows, of £1,000 until at least until April. The eviction ban is under review. There's been above inflation pay increase for public sector workers and nurses in particular have had a 12.8% increase over the last few years. He asked about laptops and devices. And he said that he quoted a figure of 50,000. In fact, the number is 560,000, Mr. Speaker, that have gone to schools. And my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Education, will be making a statement, as I said, later on about what we're going to do to help support teachers and pupils. And again, I repeat my immense thanks to them, to families who are now working so hard in unexpected circumstances to teach kids at home. And I thank the mobile companies and the BBC again for what they're doing to assist. And he'll be hearing more later about the BTEC exams. And obviously we must be fair to those who are taking BTECs as well. We appreciate the hard work that they have done. He asked about a good question about borders, and I think it's vital that we protect our our borders, protect this country from the readmission of the virus from overseas, and that's why we took tough action in respect of South Africa when the new variant became apparent there, and we will continue to take whatever action is necessary to protect this country from the readmission of the virus. I'm grateful for the Right Honourable Gentleman's support in the vaccination programme. I must say I do remember the derision with which he attacked the vaccine task force and the efforts that they went to secure huge supplies. I remember it well as at Prime Minister's question time, Mr. Speaker. I think it would be a good thing if he could continue to keep up that spirit and point out that not only did this country devise the first effective treatment of COVID, secure the first approval, stage 3 approval of a vaccine, the first to produce a vaccine that can be used at fridge temperature with great value to humanity across the world. And as I say, Mr. Speaker, the country that, as I stand before you today, has vaccinated more people than the rest of Europe combined. And I think it would be good to hear that from the gentleman opposite.
Let's head up to Epsom with Chris Grayling. Chris Grayling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is absolutely right to be taking the steps needed to protect the NHS in this very difficult time. I'm very grateful for the work being done by my local Epsom and St Helier Trust team. But the Prime Minister is also only too well aware of the thousands of businesses, many falling outside the scope of government support, which are facing desperate times. Many of us support the Prime Minister in what he's doing, but are very concerned that this House will not have an opportunity to take a further view on these regulations until the end of March. Will he give the House today an undertaking that he will personally lead a debate before February half term on progress towards reducing restrictions, and that he will not wait until the end of March to do so, if it is possible to do so, without overwhelming the NHS?
Prime Minister.
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right to say that this House should, and I think will inevitably, be given an opportunity to debate and discuss these issues at a national level before the end of March, and I hope substantially before the end of March. What we're trying to do, as he knows, is to vaccinate the first 4 cohorts in the JCVI list by the middle of February. If we can do that, and if there is no new mutation in the virus, and if the vaccine programme proceeds as planned, then there will be, I believe, substantial opportunities for relaxing the restrictions. Schools will be our priority, as I've said, Mr. Speaker, and I've no doubt that the House will be consulted as you would expect, Mr. Speaker.
Let's head up to Scotland with the leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I take the opportunity to wish you, all colleagues and members of staff, a good new year, and of course send my best wishes for a speedy recovery to the member for Cardiff Central. Mr. Speaker, I think people across these islands have entered into this new year feeling a mix of hope and fear. Hope that the vaccine will finally end this terrible pandemic, but real fear too about the increased cases, hospital admissions, and sadly, the lives lost. As our First Minister explained on Monday, this phase of the pandemic is now a race to suppress the virus and a race to vaccinate our most vulnerable. But if we are asking people for one last effort, if we are asking them to endure weeks of lockdown, then they need more clarity, they need protection, and they need financial support. Most importantly, the UK government has to act in a timely manner. It was said of the French designer Pierre Cardin that he was one step ahead of tomorrow. Nobody would say that this Prime Minister is one step ahead of tomorrow or acts and shows leadership in dealing with this health pandemic. The Prime Minister was slow to act in the spring of 2020, slow in the autumn, and here again reacts after the events to the threats that we all face. I want to ask the Prime Minister 4 specific questions on vaccines, on travel and financial support, and I would appreciate if he would answer each of them, not just for us, but for all the public that want answers. So firstly, on the vaccine, Professor Jonathan Van Tam said last month that the only thing that will slow vaccine availability are the fill and finish supplies, such as specialised vials. Can the Prime Minister tell us exactly what actions are being taken to ramp up these supplies? On travel, is the Prime Minister prepared to learn from his government's past mistakes? Will he consider closing the UK border to all but essential travel to prevent new strains of the virus spreading? On support for the self-employed, yesterday, why did the Chancellor again decide to exclude the 3 million freelancers and self-employed who haven't received a penny of financial support since the start of this crisis? They are desperate and they need help, and they expect the Prime Minister to respond today. And finally, on financial support for Scottish businesses. Yesterday morning, the Scottish Conservatives were busy making memes about an extra 375 million of Treasury support that they said was on its way to Scotland. Can the Prime Minister explain to Scottish businesses why, by the end of the day, it turned out there was no new money at all? Can the Prime Minister now give a personal commitment that the Scottish Government will get this money, this new money, for businesses in Scotland?
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman. I just point out that on his questions about the self-employed, we have supplied, as I said to the gentleman opposite, £13.7 billion already. We'll continue to support people in any way that we can with a multitude of grants and loans already totaling, I think, about £260 billion, as I've said. The Barnett consequentials for Scotland from the new money will, of course, be passed on. As I said just now, we will make sure that we protect our borders from the readmission of the virus, and he's seen what we did already in the case of the South African strain, and we'll bring forward further measures to stop the readmission of the virus. But I have to say, the general tenor of his question seems to ignore the fact that I'm delighted to say that the whole of the UK has benefited massively from the strength of the natural strength of the UK economy, the ability of the UK Treasury to make these commitments, and the mere fact that Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, every part of the United Kingdom has received the virus is entirely thanks to the strength of our national, received the vaccine, is entirely thanks to our national NHS. And that is, I think that I think we'll make common ground with the Right Honourable Gentleman opposite. It is thanks to our United Kingdom NHS, thanks to the strength of UK companies, that we are able to distribute a life-saving vaccine across the whole of our country. And I think that is a point that he might bear in mind.
Let's head up to Kenilworth with Jeremy Wright. Jeremy Wright.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Most of us do appreciate the difficulty of the judgments my right honourable friend is having to make. And can I thank him in particular for the access he's given members of this House to the government's medical and scientific advisors so we can understand them better. But would he agree that just as it's important that everyone understands the reasons why we've gone into a national lockdown, it's just as important that everyone understands the circumstances that will allow us to leave it? Can I therefore ask him, although I appreciate that he can't yet give a date, to be more definitive that when a specific point has been reached in the vaccination of priority groups, with the consequent reduction in the risks of hospitalizations and deaths, that then the balance of risk between health on the one hand and livelihoods and learning on the other will be significantly different, and that restrictions can be lifted?
Well, he's making a very important point that I know will be on the minds of everybody in the House, and everybody watching this can understand the kernel now of the debate. So let me, and I understand why he wants a more detailed timeline. I know that colleagues across the House would love to have a more detailed timeline. Let me try and repeat, I think, what I can most sensibly say today. If our understanding of the virus doesn't change dramatically again as it has, if the vaccine takes effect, the vaccines take effect in the way that we think that they will, and the rollout continues to be successful, and above all, obviously, if everybody continues to play their part in following this lockdown and following the guidance to stay home, protect the NHS and save lives, then clearly at that moment in on the 5th, around about the middle of February, 15th of February, when we have taken those 4 cohorts and immunised them, or shortly thereafter, there will be substantial opportunities to relax the restrictions that we currently face, if all those conditions are satisfied. And schools, as I say, Mr. Speaker, will clearly be the priority, and Mr. Speaker, the whole matter will quite properly be debated by this House of Commons.
Let's head to Surbiton with Ed Davey. Ed Davey.
Mr. Speaker, people are afraid and anxious. This lockdown should have come sooner, but we must all support it now and do all we can to vaccinate as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. But we also need more action to save people's jobs, their businesses, their livelihoods. Small businesses have shown incredible resilience, but now they worry whether they can survive another lockdown. And 3 million people, most of them self-employed, have been excluded from government support since the start, and the Prime Minister's answers today have not addressed that. Mr. Speaker, we must leave no one behind as we tackle this terrible virus. Employers and workers need support and certainty, and they need it now. So will the Prime Minister instruct the Chancellor to publish an emergency budget to include a business rates holiday next year, an extension to furlough at least until the summer, and support for every self-employed person in the UK, including those he has so far so unfairly excluded?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there will be a budget in the course of the next few weeks and months, as I'm sure he's aware. He's also aware that the government has made substantial cuts to business rates, to VAT, and has produced a package of £260 billion of support for businesses and jobs and livelihoods across the UK. And I repeat the points that I've made about the self-employed. I have massive sympathy with everybody who's facing a tough time at the moment. And I agree with him very much in what he said about the resilience of businesses. I think they are showing fantastic resilience under a huge amount of pressure. But the best way to help them now is for us, as I say, to follow this latest lockdown and get that vaccine rolled out and get our economy moving again in the way that we all want to. And the faster we can get through this period, the bigger the bounce back will be. And I'm confident that it will be a very, very substantial bounce back indeed.
Let's head up to Stoke-on-Trent Central with Joe Gideon. Joe Gideon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Stoke-on-Trent is keen to play our part in the national vaccination programme. Our mass vaccination centre is ready and able to serve the residents of Stoke-on-Trent and North Staffordshire. However, it has not been scheduled to go live before the end of January. Can the Prime Minister ask the Health Secretary if this can be expedited if the supply of vaccines are available earlier?
Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I'll ask the Minister to write to her as soon as possible.
Let's head to Marianne with Liz Saville-Roberts. Liz Saville-Roberts.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Llefarydd, and I also would like to send best wishes to the Member of Parliament for Cardiff Central and sincere thanks to everybody working on the front line with the NHS at this time. Now, a Conservative Party newsletter recently told party members to say, the first thing that comes into your head, even if it's nonsense. Yesterday, it appears the Chancellor took on board this advice and unwrapped £227 million of already announced funding as new for Wales. This is, and I choose my words with extreme restraint, willful misrepresentation, which deliberately misinforms desperate businesses in Wales. Will the Prime Minister apologise on behalf of his Chancellor and recognise that for Welsh COVID measures to be most effective, there's an urgent need to lift financial borrowing constraints imposed on Wales by Westminster?
Well, I'm sure the right honourable lady, for whom I have a keen regard, but not wish to accuse the Chancellor of wilful misrepresentation, Mr. Speaker. But all the cash that we've announced obviously is passported on the important thing is that the Labour government in Wales spends it sensibly. But the UK government is here to support businesses, jobs, livelihoods across the whole of the UK.
Can I just say while you're online, I'm not over happy with willful. I think we've got to think about the language we use within the chamber. These are times which are unprecedented, but I really do think members ought to be careful on the language they use. Secretary Batty Maradan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for his statement. I know he's had to take difficult decisions, and I understand why he's had to, and I fully support him. I am deeply concerned, however, about the impact of COVID-19 and lockdowns on our children and on our future generations, and especially those children who come from disadvantaged backgrounds. Does my right honourable friend share those concerns, and will he work with schools, especially the ones in my constituency, to make sure they get the IT support and laptops that they need so that we leave no child behind?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right to raise that question, and that's why we're putting so much cash, 300 million, into help schools and young people continue with their education online. We've discussed already the role of the BBC and the mobile phone companies, internet providers in helping as well, and the 560,000 devices that we've already delivered as part of a programme of 1 million for the children that need the most, laptops, computers and other devices.
Let's head to Brighton Pavilion with Caroline Lucas. Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's extraordinary that yet again the Prime Minister didn't say a word about the government's test, trace, isolate and support system. Vaccination and lockdown are essential tools, but they don't replace the need to trace infections and isolate cases to help break the chain of transmission. It is an enduring scandal that we still don't have an effective contact tracing system, despite a whopping £22 billion being thrown at private companies and consultants. So will the Prime Minister fix it, including by ensuring people can afford to self-isolate if they have to? Will he increase statutory sick pay, widen eligibility criteria so the nearly 2 million people locked out of it can finally benefit? Will he increase the value of support payments and offer hotel accommodation if people need it?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've increased the support for those who are self-isolating and obviously increased the penalties for those who fail to do so when they're asked to do so by test and trace. It's an absolutely vital part of our fight against the disease. And what it has done, I think, which people don't appreciate, is it's actually allowed this country to have an incredibly detailed understanding of where the disease is and what kind of disease we're fighting. The UK is actually conducting 47% of all the genomic tests in the world to establish what is going on with the coronavirus and all its mutations. So NHS Test and Trace is a remarkable advance. Is it perfect? Of course it isn't, but it is also indispensable to our fight against the disease, as is, of course, people's self-isolation when they are contacted. You must self-isolate.
William Bragg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I pay tribute to everybody at Stepping Hill Hospital and GPs across Stockport for their superb efforts in rolling out the vaccine, where all care home residents and those over the age of 80 will have received at least their first jab by the 15th of January. But will the Prime Minister ensure that he blasts away any bureaucratic barriers that are getting in the way and ensure that vital vials and other such equipment is in abundant supply? Because frankly, Mr. Speaker, there will be no excuses for any hindrance to this supreme national effort.
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend speaks entirely for me in what he says about the need to blast away bureaucratic obstructions, and I am proud to say at the moment that we've vaccinated more than any other country in Europe, indeed more than any other country in Europe put together. But that pace must not only be kept up, it must now, as the whole House can see, because everybody can do the maths, Mr. Speaker, it must now be accelerated. And we'll be saying more, Mr. Speaker, about how we propose to do that.
Samuel Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, for the third time in 9 months, the government has introduced a damaging lockdown policy, which we know will cause thousands of businesses to go bankrupt, cost hundreds of thousands of jobs, damage children's education, lead the national debt to soar, remove basic liberties from people which we expect in a free democracy, all because the government says that we need, and the justification is we need to suppress the virus, protect the National Health Service, and to protect the vulnerable. Since those objectives were not achieved by the first 2 lockdowns, why does the Prime Minister believe that it will be achieved this time? Is there some firm evidence for it, or is it government just hoping it'll be third time lucky?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't think anybody in this House takes any pleasure, satisfaction, whatever, in what we're being forced to do. But the Honourable Gentleman should know that lockdowns like this are being conducted and have been conducted across the whole of Europe at the moment, because, or much of Western Europe, basically because we're all facing the same phenomenon, and basically because we have to protect our NHS and stop it from being overwhelmed. And actually, that is what the last lockdowns did. They did stop the NHS from being overtopped by the wave of the pandemic, and had that happened, I'm afraid the death toll would have been unconscionable, and that is why I think when he looks at what his constituents and what the public think about this, they know that overwhelmingly we are right to protect them, protect the NHS, and save lives.
Tom Hunt.
Mr. Speaker, I actually asked the people of Ipswich to come up with ideas for this question. The one I decided to go for was about the importance of grassroots sports clubs in Ipswich, particularly boxing clubs. In the summer, I visited Patrick's Boxing Club, which got help in the first lockdown, but at the moment it is struggling. It's still got fixed costs, it's got its rent, it's got its utility bills, but it's still adding a burden. And also Unity FC Club and the Ipswich Kickboxing Academy as well, which has a fantastic jab, not stab scheme to help combat crime and antisocial behaviour. Will the Prime Minister promise me that when he considers any further support for these crucial clubs that are based in the most deprived parts of the town that I have the honour of representing, that he takes into account not just the benefits for physical and mental health, but also the key role that they play, keep kids on the straight and narrow, keep them out of harm, keep them out of trouble, and make a fantastic contribution to our wonderful town? Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Ipswich will of course be benefiting not just from kickboxing jabs, but from vaccination jabs as well, and that will enable us to get through this crisis all the faster. And I'm delighted by what he says, but we are supporting clubs such as the one he so eloquently describes by an extra £210 million to help wonderful community sports institutions such as Ipswich Kickboxing Academy throughout this pandemic.
We now go over to Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister appreciate that the campaign against COVID does not fall equally on everyone in our society? For many, this third lockdown is one of devastating fear of mental health, isolation, job loss, poverty, loss of their place of residence, and stress about the future. So will he, at the very least, ensure that statutory sick pay is increased to £320 a week, the universal credit is not cut, that the continuation of the protection of private tenants goes on after the end of this lockdown, and that above all else, he ensures that every child in every school and every student has a chance to learn online by provision of a computer and, yes, free universal broadband for all in our society?
Minister.
I thank the right honourable gentleman, who seems to be recapitulating what his right honourable colleague has already asked me, as though he was still doing his old job. But I don't necessarily want to repeat all the points that I've made. Obviously, we're investing heavily to support jobs and livelihoods throughout the country. On mental health, he's right to draw attention to the risk of increased suffering caused by the privations of lockdown. That's why we're investing hugely in mental health provision, another 13 billion plus 18 million support for wonderful mental health charities across the country.
So Desmond Swain.
Pubs can't compete with supermarkets for off sales. Even within a household, you can't play tennis or golf. Notwithstanding the assault on liberty and livelihoods, why are these regulations pervaded by a pettifogging malice?
Prime Minister.
Pettifogging, yes. Malicious, no. Mr. Speaker, the intention, and I'm going to have to take the hit here. The intention is to stop the virus, to protect the NHS, and to save lives. And to do that, we have to engage in restricting transmission between human beings. And I know that my right honourable friends and colleagues, honourable right honourable members, will find all sorts of reasons to oppose all sorts of restrictions. But in the end, Mr. Speaker, we have to look at the overall budget of risk caused by transmission between members of the human race, and that is what we're trying to restrict.
Let's head up to Greater Manchester with Lucy Powell. Lucy Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've just come from a call with the big business organisations, and I know the Prime Minister is meeting with them later on. So let me give him the heads up. Businesses are on their knees. It's been a year of lost trade and mounting debts. Cash grants are welcome, but they're not enough, and most won't get them anyway. What they desperately want is not more sticking plasters, but a proper long-term plan to help them survive to the spring and then thrive beyond it. It can't wait until the budget because many will be bust by then. So can he urgently tell his Chancellor to come to this House with a proper plan for jobs and businesses? And please don't insult us by re-rehearsing what he's already done, because honestly, it's just not enough.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, she asked for a timetable, as indeed many colleagues on both sides of the House have done so, and business rightly wants as much certainty as possible. I think what we have now, for the first time since this pandemic began, is clear sight of the end and the way to the end. And we've set a deadline, as she knows, of the middle of February, 15th of February, to vaccinate the first 4 cohorts. And she should, I'm sure she will appreciate that those groups comprise the overwhelming majority of those who have already, alas, died from COVID. So she will readily appreciate the implications of that for our ability to reopen our economy. And she will also understand, I hope, the implications that could have, if all the conditions that I've already described are satisfied, the implications that could have for businesses across the country. So I do believe there are real grounds now for them to be very hopeful and very confident about the months ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've all seen the data, and people, normal people, really understand and do understand the need for this lockdown. But like so many people across this House, so many members opposite and on these benches, I worry about our economy, jobs, businesses, mental health, children's educational attainment. So perhaps the Prime Minister could tell us how normal people in Milton Keynes and beyond, will know that things are getting better.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend, and he's absolutely right about people's feelings across the whole country. They want a sense of when they're going to get better, and I've tried to give that today. I really think with the pace of the vaccine rollout, if it can accelerate in the way that I think everybody would want, we will reach an important moment on the 15th of February, and as I've said many times in this House, I do believe things will be much better by the spring.
Let's head up to Warrington North with Charlotte Nittles. Charlotte Nittles.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Special schools weren't mentioned in the Prime Minister's speech, but they'll be remaining open over the course of lockdown. Can the Prime Minister please therefore advise the House what advice and support they have received to stay open safely for the often vulnerable young people who need them, and whether SEN school staff, students and their parents will be given priority access to the vaccine to keep them safe?
Prime Minister.
I thank SEN schools, their staff, parents, pupils for everything that they're doing, and all the work that's being done, by the way, by teachers across the country to continue to look after the children of key workers, vulnerable kids as well. And the point she makes about vaccination, which is one that I think many colleagues across the House have made, bringing forward the case for this or that group. I think it's vital that we as politicians leave that to the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, who are driven by a desire to stamp out the disease as fast as possible and to reduce mortality.
Let's head to Surrey with Jeremy Hunt. Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I fully support these measures and recognise just how difficult the decisions are. Before Christmas, we were told that testing was happening at the PHE facility at Porton Down that would tell us within a couple of weeks whether the vaccines worked against the new strain. I wonder whether the Prime Minister could update us on the latest on that. And if there is a glitch with the vaccine programme, are we implementing a plan B involving, for example, mass testing of high transmission areas, deprived communities, and so on, so that we can properly isolate as quickly as possible anyone who could transmit the virus?
Mr. Speaker, there is no reason to think that any new strain of the virus is vaccine resistant. And on his point about testing, I can say that mass lateral flow testing in communities across this country will continue to be rolled out because we still believe in its usefulness.
Let's head to Brentford with Ruth Cadbury. Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, said, whether it's on exams, financial support, border measures or test and trace, this government seems to sit and wait for the situation to reach boiling point before it acts. However, throughout the pandemic, most other governments have acted early and with clearly communicated contingency plans. So, will the Prime Minister acknowledge that the problem here is his wait-and-see leadership strategy, and that he urgently needs to revise this so that the government can get a grip?
I thought I understood the Honourable Lady to be attacking the government's wait-and-see position on the vaccines, Mr. Speaker. But I really don't. Well, I really don't think that anybody in their right mind could accuse the government of moving too slowly in that respect. And indeed, I think she might add it to her script that this country has vaccinated more than any other country in Europe put together.
The Great Brady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's assurance that this House will be consulted on the lifting of restrictions, should it be possible, before the end of March. But can I say to him that many of us are concerned at being asked to approve a lockdown which could continue until the 31st of March. Can I ask my right honourable friend to reconsider and to offer the House a vote at the end of January and at the end of February as well, not on whether to lift restrictions, but on whether to continue them or not?
Mr. Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend and just repeat what I've said several times now, that I can't believe it will be until the end of March that the House has to wait before having a new vote and a new discussion of the measures we have to take.
To Scotland with Carol Monaghan. Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've had Christmas on, Christmas off, schools in, schools out, eat out to help out, stay at home. It's simply impossible to decipher the Prime Minister's COVID strategy. So given that the efficacy of the vaccines is not yet known against emerging strains, can he assure us that his strategy is not based on vaccines alone? In order to get our schools back, can he assure us that teachers will be a priority for vaccines? And could he detail his long-term COVID exit strategy?
Minister.
I think possibly, Mr. Speaker, the best thing I can say in answer to that question is to repeat that we have, and I think it's very, very important to repeat this, we have no evidence that any strain of the virus is vaccine resistant, and I think it's very important that the Honourable Lady should be express full confidence in the vaccine programme, because that is going to be indispensable to our way out of this crisis.
Jennifer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Educating our children and giving them the best possible start in life is one of society's most important jobs, which is why I know the Prime Minister has not taken the decision to close our schools lightly. Yesterday, I spoke to the Director of Children's Services at Durham County Council about ensuring that Bishop Auckland's pupils will still be able to access learning. So on that, can the Prime Minister confirm that the government will do everything within its power to ensure that every child across the country has access to high-quality remote education during these closures?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for her campaigning for education in Bishop Auckland, and repeat what I've said already today about everything that we're doing to roll out to help support remote learning of all kinds. I know it's a tough time for children, teachers and parents, but a huge amount is being done to supply remote devices and to encourage remote learning of all kinds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the example of elections being held in other countries, including the elections held overnight in Georgia, can the Prime Minister confirm that it's his intention that the local elections in 2021 go ahead as scheduled on the 6th of May and not be delayed any further?
Prime Minister.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, that's what the law provides for, though obviously we'll have to keep it under review.
Liam Fox.
Mr. Speaker, can I congratulate my right honourable friend on getting a world-leading vaccine strategy going? Clearly, its success will depend on both the availability of the vaccine and the number of staff to administer it. As a qualified but non-practising doctor, I've volunteered to help with the scheme and would urge others to do the same. But can I ask the Prime Minister why I've been required to complete courses on conflict resolution, equality, diversity and human rights, moving and handling loads and preventing radicalisation in order to give a simple COVID jab? Can I urge him to get the NHS and the Department of Health to drop the bureaucracy, drop the political correctness and do all they can to actually get the vaccine programme moving?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend. I can tell him I was fit to be tied when I read, because I read an account of what he's described several days ago, and I'm assured by my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, that all such obstacles, all such pointless pettifoggery has been removed, and there should be absolutely nothing to stop him volunteering to be a vaccinator.
Let's head up to Blaydon with Liz Twiss. Liz Twiss.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The decision to close schools this week was inevitable, but we do know that it will have a detrimental effect on many children, especially the most disadvantaged. School staff across Blaydon, like those at Crookhill School in my constituency, are responding brilliantly to the challenge, but it's just not the same for children as being in school. Will the Prime Minister commit now to working with teachers, trade unions and others to plan how we can level up the educational and life chances of our disadvantaged pupils post-COVID?
Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed I will, Mr. Speaker, because we must tackle the impact of differential learning that the last 12 months have had, and we will be looking in particular at the advantages of one-to-one tuition, which I think can be transformational, not just for kids who are falling behind, but for all kids.
We now head to Wales with Stephen Crabb. Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Without question, one of the most important things this government did in the first lockdown was to strengthen universal credit. And that's been a lifeline, not just for people who've lost their jobs, but also for people who've kept going out to work during this pandemic. People on low wages in retail, delivery jobs, people doing cleaning jobs. Now, our plan is still to cut that support back by £20 per week in less than 3 months' time. I know the Prime Minister understands this issue, but does he agree with me that now is really not the moment to weaken our welfare safety net, and that by giving families on low incomes greater security for the year ahead by extending rather than cutting support is the right thing to do?
Prime Minister.
I fully understand the point that my right honourable friend makes, and all I'll say is that we'll of course keep this under review.
Tracy Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will have heard across the House the concern for 3 million British taxpayers who've been excluded from support since March last year. They've had a terrible Christmas and New Year, and they're looking at another 3 months with no support at all. So it's no surprise then that their thoughts about the Chancellor's 90-second financial statement on Twitter felt like a kick in the teeth for those people with nothing. So does the Prime Minister believe that the excluded are important enough to get their own statement? And if so, when will the Chancellor be coming to this House to deliver it so that those taxpayers taxpayers do not feel they are completely abandoned by this Prime Minister?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with great respect, I don't think she could accuse my honourable friend, the right honourable friend, the Chancellor, of not keeping the House informed. I'm sure he'll be using the earliest opportunity he can to update her and the rest of the House about the massive package of economic support that we're offering both the self-employed and others across this country.
Mr. Beckham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's statement that these new regulations will be reviewed every 2 weeks. But can my right honourable friend reassure me that come mid-February there will be a presumption rather than a prospect of an easing of restrictions? I understand there cannot be a cast iron guarantee. We're in a moving situation, but my constituents would like there to be a presumption, especially when it comes to schools.
Prime Minister.
Yes, I think I share her constituents' instincts. Perhaps a cautious presumption is what I would advise them to make.
Let's head up to Liverpool with Ian Byrne. Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ofcom estimates that 1.8 million children in our country are digitally excluded with a lack of access to equipment or broadband. And I place a bet with the Prime Minister that this does not include a single pupil from his former school of Eton. Digital poverty is a class issue. The Labour policy of universal free broadband that he denied in 2019 is now desperately needed. Can the Prime Minister outline how he will solve the issue of digital poverty, which is widening the already vast educational inequalities in this country, so not one child is left behind during this lockdown?
Prime Minister.
He'd of course know what the government is doing to roll out to gigabit broadband across the whole of the country, to give every part of the country access to superfast broadband. But in terms of the needs of people who don't have access to broadband yet, of course he'll have heard what we've said about the mobile phone, the internet providers who are coming together today to provide cut price access for those who need it across the country. I think that's the right thing to do.
Dr. Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once we've vaccinated the high-risk groups, so the vast majority of people who are at risk of death from COVID are protected, what will be the metrics in decisions made around moving areas down the tiers and reopening schools?
Prime Minister.
Grateful, Mr. Speaker. The metrics would be exactly the same as they were under the previous tiering system, so that we look at the rate of reproduction of the disease, we look at pressure on the NHS and the other factors that he would expect.
Let's head to Birmingham with Steve McCabe. Steve McCabe.
The weather's even worse now than it was last March, Mr. Speaker. Will there be a repeat of the Everyone In initiative for rough sleepers, with the Prime Minister guaranteeing a repeat of emergency funding at least the same level as committed last March?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think one of the consolations of the previous lockdown was that we did succeed in helping so many people off the streets, I think about 29,000, and we will continue to do everything in our power, and I think that the Honourable Gentleman raises a very, very important issue. We'll do everything in our power to prevent people from finding themselves sleeping rough or homeless during this winter, and that remains the policy of the government.
Lucy Appam.
The vaccine is a massive achievement of which we're right to be proud, and the Prime Minister should be congratulated for all his efforts in that achievement. We must cut away all barriers to speeding up the rollout, bin bureaucracy, incentivise 24/7 working by PHE, and pay bonuses, use drive-throughs, pharmacies, mobilise troops and volunteers. Will my right honourable friend make this rollout a dynamic, can-do, logistical, British miracle, saving lives and livelihoods, and not waste a single day taking us out of this lockdown hell?
Minister.
Well, I think that my honourable friend perfectly captures the mood of the country about the vaccine rollout. That is what we all want to see. We want to see a great national effort now, and she's right to call attention not just to the role of the NHS and GP GP clinics and GP services and hospitals, but also the vital role that can be played by pharmacies, the role of the armed services. We want to bring them all together to roll out this vaccine as fast as possible. And the picture she paints is entirely correct.
Let's go to Scotland with Martin Day. Martin Day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Surely those who cannot work because of government restrictions should be compensated and supported. So given that the Chancellor has said that coronavirus restrictions could continue for months to come, will the Prime Minister commit to continuing furlough for as long as is needed and extending sector-specific furlough payments to the hardest hit sectors? And will he ever do anything for the 3 million who have been completely excluded from any support?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, they have not been excluded, and we continue to support people across the country. Furlough will indeed be continued for further, as he knows, and he should just bear in mind what I said to his right honourable colleague. It is thanks to the might of the UK Treasury, the fundamental strength of the UK economy, that we're able to make this support available across the whole of the UK.
Let's head to Essex with Stephen Metcalfe. Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend for his statement and commend him for his actions? It's obvious our clearest way out of these restrictions is to deploy the vaccine at speed and scale to protect those most of risk of serious illness. We need to therefore lay out plans, not only for the first 4 groups in the JCVI list, but also how we intend to get the vaccine to other key groups that keep our country running day to day, such as teachers, police officers and home carers.
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend, thank him. Well, we will have studied the JCVI's list of priority groups, and we will be setting out indeed, my honourable friend, the Health Secretary, will be setting out a programme for rolling that vaccine out, or those vaccines out, beyond the first 4 that I've already described.
Let's head up to Manchester with Jeff Smith. Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Ross has had no work since the first lockdown and is one of the people who've fallen through the gaps in the self-employed support scheme. His only income now is £598 per month universal credit. His rent, council tax and bills are £590 a month, so he's living on £8 a month. Could the Prime Minister live on £8 a month? And if not, will he ask the Chancellor to look again at how we can help the people excluded by the self-employed support scheme?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know that this has been raised many times already today by members across the House, but I must repeat what I've said. The 13.7 billion has gone to support the self-employed already. Further measures, I've no doubt, will be forthcoming, but the overall package of support is £260 billion across the whole of the country.
Heading down into Cheshire to Esther McVeigh. Esther McVeigh.
The Prime Minister will know that blue-collar conservatism was instrumental in persuading the supermarkets to return the business rate relief that they did not need. We asked them to do this on the basis that there are many who have gone without support during this pandemic, and it was on that basis that they returned that money. So will my right honourable friend ensure that that £2 billion returned by the supermarkets will go to those who have not had any of the support so far, who have been excluded, because they cannot go another 3 months without any income?
Prime Minister.
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker, and I thank her and her fellow blue-collar Conservatives for that initiative. I think it was entirely right, and I think that those corporations, those supermarkets, were entirely right to return that cash. But I can tell her that overall, when you look at the government's support packages, they go overwhelmingly towards the poorest and neediest in society. They are fundamentally a very, very progressive package of measures.
Remaining in Cheshire with Derek Twigg. Derek Twigg.
Mr. Speaker, cancer treatment has again been delayed. Even a 4-week delay is associated with increased mortality. Many cases were delayed longer than 4 weeks in the first lockdown. Today, Mr. Speaker, the Health Service Journal reports that the NHS is having difficulty in agreeing payments with private providers for surgery and treatment. Will the Prime Minister take action to stop any profiteering and ensure private providers use their capacity for NHS patients requiring urgent surgery, and urgently bring a detailed plan to this House on how the government intends to ensure that cancer patients get the treatment they need in good time?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I certainly can. One of the reasons for wanting to keep COVID under control in the way that we hope to do with this lockdown is, of course, to allow the NHS to continue with cancer treatment and other vital services. And he makes an excellent point about the need for all provision now to be dedicated to fighting COVID or providing essential services for the British public. And he can expect to hear more about the way in which we intend to cooperate with private providers.
Let's head to North Wales with Rob Roberts. Rob Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So far, Welsh Government has had an additional £5.3 billion in additional funding for COVID, but is still sitting on more than £1 billion in unallocated money, while my businesses in Delyn are in serious danger. Can my right honourable friend apply any pressure on the Welsh Government to provide more assistance to Delyn businesses, or could those funds be reclaimed by UK Government so that we can step in to help businesses where Welsh Labour is letting them down?
Prime Minister.
Well, I think my honourable friend raises a very, very good and important point, and he is right to take that up with Welsh Labour, to hold them to account, and to insist that the Welsh Government spends that money where it needs to be spent.
Let's head to Leeds with Hilary Benn. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister tell the House when every child in my Leeds constituency and across the country will have access to a laptop, and when every parent who needs help will be able to afford the necessary broadband or phone charges so that their children can connect up to their lessons, their teachers and their classmates? And who should they contact if they can't?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he's raising the very important needs of his constituents in respect of broadband connectivity, of laptops, and I totally understand their concerns. I think obviously we're massively expanding those and rolling them out, but I think for the detailed answer that he needs about each of his constituents and of those in need, I will have to write to him, if I may, setting out exactly when they can expect the help that he's talking about.
Sir Edward Lee.
I thank the Prime Minister for listening to our representations on keeping places of worship open. And doesn't this show how, if we work together with a pragmatic approach, we can reopen the economy sensibly? And on this theme, many of us who will vote for the government tonight, out of loyalty or because we want to preserve the government's authority, are worried that with every successive lockdown, they are less and less effective, because whilst every death is tragic, young people will have noticed reports that out of a population of tens of millions, only 400 have actually died who are healthy between 16 and 60. So will the Prime Minister tell people like me in these priority groups that there has to be an element of self-reliance, self-isolation, and actually looking after our own health, and we can't just rely on successive lockdowns? And particularly with the point of carers, I noticed that the Gainsborough testing centre was turning away people who were not showing symptoms. Surely we want to encourage all carers of all elderly people to go in and be tested. So let's get rid of all these bureaucratic hurdles and get more reliance on self-reliance.
Yes. Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right that we need to encourage people to go ahead and be tested, and I think he should encourage all the people of Gainsborough to do that where they have symptoms. And as he will know, there are initiatives available for community testing with lateral flow testing that I think should be encouraged by colleagues across the House. I know are being encouraged by colleagues across the House. I totally support that. But I also think that the British public and this House overwhelmingly supports measures to protect the NHS and save lives. And he makes a valid point about the way that coronavirus impacts on the population. It does fall disproportionately on the elderly and the vulnerable, but those lives must be saved where we possibly can, and I think that is what people of all generations in this country want to do.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister and Government for all their help that they've given so far over the last 9 to 10 months. However, can I highlight the aviation and the aerospace sectors, which have almost entirely shut down since the beginning of the pandemic. And as of the 4th of January, UK flight volumes were 73% below the pre-crisis levels. There are now legal restrictions on travel, and some countries have banned any arrivals from the UK. This is having a catastrophic effect and impact upon aviation and aerospace and the millions of jobs that rely on them. Yet these industries have received no sector-specific support, unlike others such as hospitality. In light of the unique impacts being felt by these sectors, could I ask the Prime Minister to provide sector-specific support to aviation and aerospace to see them through this very deep crisis?
Minister.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman has raised this with me before, and he's an ardent campaigner for aerospace, and he's quite right. It's a vital industry for our country. As he knows, we have time to pay in other packages of support, but we will be ensuring that we do everything we can to get the aerospace industry in the UK back on its feet as fast as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every vaccination jab in the arm should be viewed as a pupil who can return to the classroom. And it's absolutely vital that we view it with that equation. Can I say to the Prime Minister, I've not always followed him through the division lobbies on these restrictions, but I will do so today, because it's absolutely clear to me that the vaccination changes the game and rids us of this pandemic. But can I ask him to ensure that the vaccination is available to the rural areas, such as the one that I represent in rural Rother, where we don't have the GP network or indeed the hub in place as of yet?
Well, I'm really grateful to my honourable friend for his support and for what he has just said, and we want to roll out the vaccine across the whole of the country as fast as possible. I think it is, I hope, common ground in this House today that we are right as a country to be putting those jabs in the arms of those who are most at risk of mortality first, because that is the way to reduce the death toll, and that indeed is the way that we hope to get our country back on its feet as fast as possible.
To Twickenham with Munira Wilson. Munira Wilson.
Much, Mr. Speaker. We're now in a race against time to save lives, save jobs and restore our freedoms, which is why we need a 24/7 vaccination programme, bringing vaccination to every high street in the country. So I welcome the Prime Minister's comments about the role of community pharmacy. Will he confirm that it's not just a few big chains that will be involved, but the thousands of independent community pharmacies, such as Goods Chemist in Twickenham, who stand ready, waiting and able to vaccinate, but have been knocked back? They will provide vital capacity and be able to reach people that other mass vaccination hubs cannot reach.
Well, I must say that the Honourable Lady is absolutely right to draw attention to the potentially vital role of community pharmacies. There are about 12,000 in this country, as I'm sure she knows. In my experience, they're great places. They're hygienic. The staff are knowledgeable. They're professional, and I think they can. We've already signed up hundreds to the campaign, and there'll be many more. I can assure her to follow.
Speaker, I think it is exceptionally welcome that the UK has consistently tested more people than any other country in the world. And I think that this House owes a debt of gratitude and thanks to Kate Bingham and her team for procuring the vaccine at such large amounts and such diversified quantities, something that the EU vaccination scheme never managed to achieve. So can the Prime Minister just reassure me and the members of the South West that we will see the vaccine rolled out and that the lockdown will not be extended beyond any necessary point than it needs to?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I thank him for his words about the vaccine task force, which, as I say, was satirised by the right honourable gentleman opposite, which I think was a mistake. And we will do everything we can to roll out that vaccine to his constituency and all constituencies across this country.
Amanjeet Singh Desi.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, on Sunday, the Prime Minister came on national television and, looking into the eyes of the British people, announced and told worried parents that it was perfectly safe for them to send their dearly loved children to school. The following day, after being buffeted around by scientists, the opposition leader and devolved governments, he announced that it was not safe for children to go to school and promptly closed them all down. So does the Prime Minister agree that these constant last-minute U-turns and this erratic approach to policy making is not conducive to assuaging anxious people who are desperately seeking stability a certainty and assured leadership.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I really must ask the honourable gentleman opposite to withdraw what he's just said, because I did not at any stage say that schools were not safe. That is absolutely not what I said. And he, in all fairness, he should correct that. And I give him the opportunity to do so if he chooses to.
The Prime Minister closed down schools, so therefore they are not safe for people to return.
I think it's now on the record. The Prime Minister's actually put what he did say on the record. Right, let us move on to Craig Whittaker in Calder Valley. Calder Valley, Craig Whittaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been contacted by several dentists and dental assistants who've been told locally that they do not qualify as health workers for early priority under the vaccination rollout. I am aware that my honourable friend, the member for Mole Valley, a dentist himself, has campaigned tirelessly for dental teams to be in Category 2 with other healthcare workers. I wonder if my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, can advise for clarity whether dental teams are in fact in Priority 2 with other healthcare workers for the vaccination rollout.
Well, like my honourable friend, I'm a big fan of our colleague, the member for Mole Valley, the great dentist, and I can tell him that all dentists in patient-facing roles and members of their dental teams who may have social contact with patients are eligible to be offered the COVID vaccine, and we encourage them all to take it if they're offered it.
Let's head to Dame Margaret Hodge. Dame Margaret.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My local hospital, Queen's, is one of many hospitals that is facing critical pressures with the supply of oxygen to patients. Demand for oxygen is running at 100% or more of the supply available. Will the Prime Minister assure me and my constituents that action is being taken to ensure safe and secure supply of oxygen? And can he tell me what contingency plans he has in place so that hospitals aren't overwhelmed and closed, critically ill patients aren't moved, and every patient receives the right amount of oxygen when they need it?
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Lady, and I will immediately look into the matter she raises about oxygen at Queen's Hospital. It hadn't been drawn to my attention before, but we'll be making sure that we get back to her as soon as we can.
Let's head to Hampshire with Damien Hines. Damien Hines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, the invisible shield goes first around the most vulnerable, and it's the JCVI that determines that sequence. But once the highest risk groups have been vaccinated, can I encourage my right honourable friend with the JCVI in looking again at prioritising key workers, including teachers, because of the special role that teachers play in our society and because we prioritise education?
I fully understand the point that my right honourable friend makes, and I'm sure that it will be borne in mind by the JCVI as they continue to make their judgments.
Let's head up to Lancashire with Cat Smith. Cat Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor announced a financial support package via a 90-second video on Twitter yesterday, but with him not coming to the House, it does make it very difficult for us to ask questions, so perhaps the Prime Minister can help. Yesterday's announcement on grants didn't say how long this new one-off grant support is intended to last, so perhaps the Prime Minister can tell us what will happen on business support should the current lockdown have to be extended or the vaccine rollout delayed.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Chancellor was very clear about the £4.6 billion with its consequentials that he announced to the House, and I really must say I don't think that anybody could fault the Chancellor for his willingness to come to the House and explain what we're going to do.
Let's head up to Rutland with Alicia Kearns. Alicia Kearns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Prime Minister join me in thanking the extraordinary efforts of the armed forces, especially those in Rutland and Melton, to defeat this virus? But at this time of national crisis, some of our enemies are seeking to exploit opportunities to undermine us. So can the Prime Minister reassure me that our vaccination programme will extend to our armed forces personnel and reserves most at risk from catching COVID in the course of their duties, especially those deployed abroad on mission-critical operations, so that their safety and ours is protected?
Minister.
I thank our armed forces from the bottom of my heart, and I share very much what she's just said. They played an outstanding role throughout this pandemic, moving patients to hospital where that was necessary from remote places, conducting testing, and now playing a big role in vaccines as well. And I'm sure that they're, like every other part of the public sector, they will be considered by the JCVI as they come to make their decisions about the allocation of the vaccine.
Let's head to Hackney with Diane Abbott. Diane Abbott.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware that as school lessons move online, for poor families in areas like Hackney, the cost of pay-as-you-go broadband is completely prohibitive. He's talking about coming to cut price arrangements, but what so many families need is access to free broadband, an excellent policy which was in Labour's 2019 manifesto. No child should be deprived of an education because their parents can't afford the broadband costs. So will he look again at the question of providing free broadband when it comes to accessing online education?
Minister.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, but I think the arrangements that are being put in place by the mobile phone companies and others will cover the vast bulk of the cost at the very least. But I'm happy to come back to her about exactly what is being offered.
Let's head to Somerset with Ian Littlegranger. Ian Littlegranger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the Bridgewater and West Somerset constituency, we do accept that the lockdown was vital, and we do appreciate, Prime Minister, the extra help for businesses. But will my right honourable friend urge you to consider the way government help for local authorities is being paid? Somerset County Council has been given huge grants and then diverted much of the money to balance their books, which I don't think is what this was ever for. These cowboys want to become a new unitary authority. It is a con trick using that cash that was meant to fight COVID. Prime Minister is Somerset born and bred, and I please urge him to put a stop to this so that the money is going to the people that need it most, which is the people of Somerset.
Well, he's quite right. My honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight what's going on in Somerset, where the county obviously has a duty to use COVID grants for that purpose and not for any other. And I thank him for drawing attention to what's going on.
Let's head up to Scotland with Alan Smith. Alan Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Happy New Year. To govern's to choose, and there's been a lot of tough decisions made by the UK government, and we've supported a number of the business support mechanisms that have been announced. But according to the House of Commons Library this afternoon, the UK government has chosen to spend £3.3 billion of borrowed money on the stamp duty freeze, which is a vast subsidy to the middle classes who are buying and selling domestic property who don't need subsidy. Does the Prime Minister regret prioritising that and excluding so many people, small companies, freelancers in the productive economy who do really need support?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, but that's entirely to upside down and misrepresents what the package of support has done. If you look at the £260 billion, it is overwhelmingly progressive and it goes disproportionately to support the poorest and neediest in society. And that's what I think this House and this country would expect.
Let's head to the Deepings with Sir John Hayes. Sir John Hayes and wife.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Millions of Britons live in remote rural places, including many here in Lincolnshire. The Prime Minister will know that isolation fuels fear, which exacerbates disadvantage. So he will know too that only vaccination will bring the safety that assuages those fears. Will the Prime Minister reassure my constituents that local doctors' surgeries will be equipped and supplied able to vaccinate the vulnerable, not later, but sooner?
Yes, it's our intention, and Mr. Speaker, that doctors' surgeries, which clearly play a crucial part in the vaccination programme, will be equipped as fast as possible with supplies of the vaccine, as plentiful, I hope, as the copies of wisdom that I see adorn my honourable friend's shelf. That's what we intend to do. And I may say how delightful it was to see his wife Susan briefly in the background.
Let's head to Yorkshire with Imran Hussain. Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the Chancellor announced his support schemes for businesses and workers last year, I repeatedly warned him that their coverage did not go far enough and that many people in Bradford would be unfairly excluded, putting jobs, businesses and the livelihoods of the self-employed at risk. Will the Prime Minister therefore listen to my calls and the calls of campaign groups like Excluded UK to ensure that the same mistakes are not made and guarantee that everybody in Bradford who needs financial support during these difficult times will get it?
Yes, of course, Mr. Speaker. We will listen to the calls of Excluded UK as we listen to all such calls. And I repeat the message that I've been making today, that the support packages are there to help businesses protect jobs and livelihoods across the country, but they benefit disproportionately the poorest and the neediest.
Sir Christopher Cho.
Mr. Speaker, can I ask my right honourable friend what the public health justification is for criminalising gatherings held exclusively between those who have already been vaccinated for more than 3 weeks, where there is no risk of infection or transmission? Will my right honourable friend use his libertarian instincts and immediately introduce an exemption for such gatherings so that the many people in my constituency in the octogenarian group will be able to celebrate Brexit sooner rather than later?
I don't think any power on earth is going to prevent my right honourable friend from celebrating Brexit, but his iron logic is of course applied to the restrictions which we've been forced to bring in. And all I can say, Mr. Speaker, as I think most members across this House understand, is that the whys and wherefores of each restriction are not necessarily susceptible to iron logic, but cumulatively they are there to protect the public, and I believe the public understands that.
Sent to South Wales with Alex Davies-Jones. Mr Davies-Jones.
Diolch, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware that the Welsh Labour Government has committed to providing the most generous financial package available to businesses across the UK. Sadly, in Pontypridd, even the very best support available hasn't been able to prevent mass redundancies and business closures. My constituents could have been helped if this Tory government had stepped up to the plate sooner and committed to the union when Wales went into an earlier lockdown. Could the Prime Minister therefore explain why Wales continues to be an afterthought and what steps he will be taking to prevent people in Pontypridd from being excluded from any future support?
Well, Mr. Speaker, Wales is actually at the forefront of our thoughts and continues to be. We're anxious to continue to support the people of Wales in any way that we can. I think the salient point that I take from today is there's £1 billion that the Welsh Labour government has failed to spend in the way that they could, and I would urge them to get on and do that. But the UK government will continue to support Wales and as we support the people of the whole United Kingdom.
Let's head to Norfolk with Jerome Mayhew. Jerome Mayhew.
Mr. Speaker, in Norfolk, those most at risk from COVID have already received 27,000 vaccination first injections since the 9th of December. They're now available in our hospitals and 11 primary care networks, including the excellent Fakenham medical practice in my constituency of Broadland. From Monday, these sites will be joined by many others. We're ready to do whatever it takes to keep up with vaccine supply. So what are the chances of securing more than 2 million doses of vaccine per week?
Mr. Speaker, I thank him for what he's doing to campaign for vaccines in Broadland and indeed to scale up at speed across the country. I've said what I've said about the pace of the rollout that I want to see. That's already, as I think the Health Secretary would confirm, extremely challenging for our GPs, for our hospitals. It's a big target. It's a big ask of the country. As he will know, because he may have heard me say this several times already today, this government has been going faster than any other country in Europe, and we intend to remain out in front.
59 is withdrawn, so we're going to David Jones in Wales. David Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In March last year, the government and the devolved administrations very laudably adopted a united response to the pandemic with a clear, jointly agreed message that was easy to communicate. But since then, they have pursued different approaches with different terminology and different messaging, which can, and I believe does, lead to confusion. So could my right honourable friend please work with the leaders of the devolved administrations by following the example of the 4 chief medical officers who have worked closely together and returning to the consistency and clarity of messaging that prevailed last March?
Well, I think that my right honourable friend makes a very important point about the occasional dissonances between the UK government and some of the devolved authorities, though actually, if you look beneath the political surface, you look beneath some of the argy-bargy that goes on, the fundamental message is the same. And I think it was very telling that the 3 devolved administrations and the UK government came together to enact the same, fundamentally the same package of measures at the same time yesterday and today.
To Cambridge with Daniel Zeichner. Daniel Zeichner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've listened closely to the Prime Minister, but at no point have I heard him apologise to education leaders, teachers, students and parents for the chaos earlier this week. He rightly asks the public to change our behaviours, which is in all our interests, but there is a reciprocal obligation on him too. So what has he learned from all this, and what will he do differently in future?
Mr. Speaker, I certainly wish to pay tribute to everybody involved in the education sector, the teachers, parents, pupils, everybody who's made a heroic effort to cope with this pandemic. And I think perhaps what he and I would agree on, that it was important to do everything we could as a country and a government to keep kids in schools if we possibly could. And indeed, I believe that was the policy of the Labour opposition, at least on Monday morning. And indeed, I understand why the opposition wanted to keep schools open. We all wanted to keep schools open. Alas, the pandemic has not made that possible, and we've got to take the steps that we've taken. I hope that he will also support them.
Let's head to Amersham with Dame Cheryl Gillen. Dame Cheryl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. PHE data shows that younger adults with learning disabilities and autism are up to 6 times more likely to die of COVID. Please, can they be added to the priority vaccination list immediately? And during previous lockdowns, vital exemptions included being able to exercise more frequently for autistic people. These were incredibly important in helping them cope and continue to have that much needed routine in their lives. Will the Prime Minister confirm that these will apply for the new lockdown so that autistic people are not left stranded? And will he commit to accessible information about this being published as soon as possible?
Minister?
Yes, indeed, I will, Mr. Speaker, to commit to better and fuller information if that is necessary. Though, of course, as she knows, a general principle of these restrictions that people have more freedoms when they need to exercise for health needs.
Let's head to Devon with Ben Bradshaw. Ben Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If, as reports suggest, the government intends requiring people arriving in the UK to have a negative PCR tests within 72 hours of their arrival, how will British people currently abroad in areas where it's difficult to get quick turnaround PCR tests get home? And I should declare an interest.
I think that the people of this country would want to see, as I do, proper protection, as I believe that the benches opposite want to do, see proper protection against the readmission of the virus. And I'm sure the honourable gentleman understands that too.
Let's head up to Burton with Kate Griffiths. Kate Griffiths.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently had the chance to volunteer at our local vaccination centre, hosted by Burton Albion Community Trust. And I'm grateful to the work of Dr. David Atherton, chair of our local primary care network, and all his colleagues involved in the rollout of the vaccine to residents across Burton and Uttoxeter. Can I ask the Prime Minister to consider the consent process when looking at ways of speeding up rollout? At the moment, I'm advised that individual consent by a healthcare clinician takes 10 to 15 minutes. This means 41,000 hours to consent and vaccinate the priority groups in East Staffordshire alone. Will the Prime Minister consider a national consent model to help speed up this process?
My honourable friend makes a very interesting suggestion, and but I should stress that we have no plans to make vaccines compulsory in this country. However, we want to make it as smooth and as easy as possible, which I think is her objective. And I think she would join me in wanting to encourage everybody who is offered a vaccine to take it up as soon as possible.
Senator Scotland with Pete Wishart. Pete Wishart.
And thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Prime Minister's had a cursory glance at Scotland and seen the massive approval ratings for our First Minister in her handling of the COVID crisis. And has he observed the clear leadership she has offered our nation? Does he ever sort of think about comparing his poor performance with her and wish that he could offer the same type of leadership to the UK?
Mr. Speaker, I must confess I haven't given that particular matter any thought, because I've been occupied entirely with protecting the NHS, fighting coronavirus and saving lives, and I might respectfully say that is what should be his priority as well, rather than these, if I may say, slightly abstract political considerations.
Remaining in Scotland with Douglas Ross. Douglas Ross.
Throughout this pandemic, the UK government have provided the Scottish government with billions of additional support, but we know hundreds of millions of that remains unspent. These are vital funds that could help to protect jobs and support businesses. So is there anything further that can be done to encourage the Scottish government to get these monies out to Scottish businesses as quickly as possible?
I think the best thing I can do is encourage my honourable friend in the excellent work that he is doing in holding the Scottish Nationalist Government to account, and encourage them to get on and use the funds that the UK government is giving the people of Scotland to support jobs in Scotland.
Heading up to Yorkshire with Alex Sobel. Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Prime Minister will agree that councils have borne the brunt of COVID, and particularly during lockdown have given all our communities maximum support. Leeds has incurred £40 million of additional costs as a council, not covered by the grants the government have given, and will now face further lockdown costs and have an overall £100 million budget shortfall, in main part caused by years of central government underfunding. Will the Prime Minister speak to his good friend the Chancellor to grant local councils a one-off payment to offset the additional costs incurred by COVID-19 to ensure the financial stability of councils this year and next?
Prime Minister.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, I know that many councils find themselves under great pressure, though some have handled their budgets better than others. We've given £4.6 billion, I believe, to support local councillors. We'll continue to support them. And I thank, by the way, the staff and the workforce of councils for the huge and vital role that they all help to play in fighting this disease.
Teresa Villiers.
I received a worrying call this morning from the chair of the Barnet Council Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee, indicating that it may be that only 13 care homes in the borough have received vaccinations. Will the Prime Minister intervene to make sure the frail elderly and their carers in Barnet get the vaccinations they need as soon as possible?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I will. I think since I've said that I want to have maximum transparency, I think I can. I do want to see an accelerated rollout of vaccination in care homes. So far, I believe that 10% of care home residents and 14% of care home staff have received the vaccine, but that clearly needs to be stepped up.
Let's head to the Rhondda with Chris Bryant. Chris Bryant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's been great to see vaccination already starting in the Rhondda, but obviously we can only give it when it arrives. And the Prime Minister quite rightly said earlier that we should be prioritising for the vaccine those who are at risk of mortality. Well, Rhondda, Cynnon Taff has the highest, unfortunately, the highest rate of death per 100,000 of any local authority in the country. We have a very large percentage of people who are extremely vulnerable, and we have a higher than average percentage of people who are working in the NHS. So can I urge the Prime Minister, as a matter of urgency, to prioritise communities like the Rhondda and make sure Rhondda surgeries are not just getting 70 or 80 doses of vaccine a week, but hundreds, so that we can vaccinate everybody at risk?
Well, he makes an eloquent point about the way in which many people in the Rhondda will naturally fall into the high qualifying groups to be identified, or that already have been identified by the JCVI.
We now head up to Yorkshire with Jason McCartney. Jason McCartney.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Chancellor's £4.6 billion in new lockdown grants, but can the Prime Minister please look again at more support for hospitality, pubs, breweries, the entertainment industry, tourism, weddings, the self-employed and those excluded so far, and specifically maybe look at delaying the tax return deadline to help freelancers and the self-employed, and also look at extending business rates holiday and the VAT reduction, and finally look at setting up a hospitality and tourism recovery fund.
I thank my honourable friend, and I know that our right honourable friend, the Chancellor, is going to consider all measures necessary to allow the hospitality sector to bounce back just as fast as we can get them out of the restrictions that business currently faces and get them bouncing back. And that will depend, as the House has heard extensively today, on our ability to roll out this vaccine. But above all, it depends on our ability to follow the rules, the restrictions, the guidance of these measures. And I hope very much that honourable members will support them this afternoon.
In order to allow the safe exit of vulnerable members participating in this business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order. Okay. Order! I call the Secretary, Gavin Williamson, to make a statement.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make a statement regarding schools in national lockdown. The last thing any Education Secretary wants to do is announce that schools will close, and this is not a decision that the government ever wanted to take. I'd like to reassure everyone that our schools have not suddenly become unsafe. but limiting the number of people who attend them is essential when the COVID rates are climbing as they are now. We must curb the escalating cases of COVID throughout the country and prevent the National Health Service from being overwhelmed. That is why today I'm setting out the contingency plans I had prepared, but that I had hoped never had to implement. I'd like to thank all of our teachers, all of our education staff and our social workers for all that they have been doing to keep children and young people safe and learning. During the lockdown, early years settings remain open nationally to all, providing vital early education and childcare. Schools will be open too for those vulnerable children and the children of critical workers. Those at university will predominantly study online, although there are a small number of exceptions, including those studying medicine, healthcare and education. Unwelcome though this latest lockdown is, and I'm very conscious of the real challenges that parents are facing with their children at home, we are far better placed to cope with it than we were last March. We are now better prepared to deliver online learning. This is an important step forward in supporting children to make the progress with their education that they so desperately need, and we'll also do what we can to help their parents. I'd also like to thank all of those parents and carers who are having to step up once more to take on the challenge of home learning. We have set out clear, legally binding requirements for schools to provide high-quality remote education. This is mandatory for all state-funded schools and will be enforced by Ofsted. We expect schools to provide between 3 and 5 hours teaching a day, depending on the child's age. If parents feel their child's school is not providing suitable remote education, they should first raise their concerns with the teacher or head teacher, and failing that, report the matter to Ofsted. Ofsted will inspect schools of any grade where it has serious concerns about the quality of remote education being provided. We have also significantly stepped up the digital support we are providing to schools and parents. The fantastic Oak National Academy continues to provide video lessons for all ages across all subjects, and yesterday the BBC announced it will be delivering the biggest push on education in its history, bringing 14 weeks of educational programmes and lessons to every household in the country. Our delivery of laptops and tablets continues apace. We've purchased more than 1 million laptops and tablets and have already delivered over 560,000 of those to schools and local authorities, with an extra 100,000 being distributed this week alone. By the end of next week, we'll have delivered 750,000 devices. We're also working with all of the United Kingdom's leading mobile network operators to provide free data for key educational sites. We're very grateful to EE3, Tesco Mobile, Smarty, Sky Mobile, Virgin Mobile, O2 and Vodafone for supporting this offer. We've also been delivering 4G routers to families who need to access the internet. Another area where we have learnt lessons is on exams. Last year, all 4 nations of the United Kingdom found their arrangements for awarding grades did not deliver what they needed, with the impact felt painfully by students and their parents. Although exams are the fairest way we have of assessing what a student knows, the impact of this pandemic now means that it is not possible to have these exams this year. I can confirm that GCSEs, A-levels and AS-level exams will not go ahead this summer. This year we're going to put our trust in teachers rather than algorithms.
My son would be really pleased.
The department and Ofqual had already worked up a range of contingency options. While the details will need to be fine-tuned in consultation with Ofqual, the exam boards and teaching representative organisations, I can confirm now that I wish to use a form of teacher-assessed grades with training and support provided to ensure these are awarded fairly and consistently across the country. I know students and staff have worked hard to prepare for the January exams and assessments of vocational and technical qualifications, and we want to allow schools and colleges to continue with these assessments where they judge it is right to do so. No college should feel pressured to offer these, and we will ensure all students are able to progress fairly, just as we will with VTQs in the summer. I know there is understandably concern about free school meals. We are going to provide extra funding to support schools to provide food parcels or meals to eligible children. Where schools cannot offer food parcels or use local solutions, we will ensure a national voucher scheme is in place so that every eligible child can access free school meals while their school remains closed. Finally, I would like to turn to our programme of testing for the virus. There has been a brilliant concerted effort in secondary schools and colleges to deliver testing for the start of this term. And none of this work to roll this out is going to be wasted. Regular testing will take place of staff and students in school and in due course help us to reopen schools as soon as possible. Testing is going to be the centre of our plans to return children back to school, back to the classroom, back to college as soon as possible. Mr. Speaker, I never wanted to be in a position where we had to close schools again. I believe that schools should always have their gates open, welcoming children and always being at the heart of their community. The moment that the virus permits, all our children will be back in school with their teachers and their friends. But until then, we have put in place the measures we need to make sure that they continue to progress. And for this reason, I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State Kate Green.
Thank you and a Happy New Year, Mr. Speaker. May I begin by paying tribute to the Deputy General Secretary of the NASUWT, Gareth Young, who tragically died shortly before Christmas. I'm sure the House will join me in sending condolences to his loved ones and to his friends and colleagues in the Union. Mr. Speaker, I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement, but it's disappointing that he didn't make a New Year's resolution to avoid U-turns or chronic incompetence. Once again, where the Secretary of State goes, chaos and confusion follows, and it's children, families and education staff across the country who pay the price for his incompetence. So, Mr. Speaker, I can suggest a New Year's resolution for the Secretary of State, that he at least resolve to start answering my questions. Every pupil who's not in school must be able to access education. We must do everything we can to safeguard learning throughout this lockdown. And I pay tribute to everyone who's made it possible to keep pupils learning online, the incredible teachers, leaders, support staff in schools and colleges, and those like Oak and the BBC who are doing a huge amount to make learning accessible. I welcome the Secretary of State's commitment on digital devices, and I'm glad he's listened to Labour and to the charities across the country who called for zero rating of educational sites. But Ofqual estimate that up to 1.78 million children do not have access to a device. Can he guarantee that under his plans, every child who needs a device will have one as soon as possible, and that every one of those children will be able to learn remotely? And may I repeat the question that the Leader of the Opposition asked the Prime Minister earlier? Will the welcome data deal done with mobile providers take effect immediately? I welcome his comments on free school meals, and I hope he can guarantee that every child eligible for this support is already receiving it. If not, can he assure me that within days they will do so? Mr. Speaker, months ago, the Education Secretary gave a cast iron commitment that exams would go ahead. At that moment, we should have known they were doomed to be cancelled. I wanted exams to go ahead fairly, but I was always clear that there must be a plan B if that was not possible. For months, there was no sign of any such plan, although the risk that exams couldn't happen has always been predictable. The Secretary of State says he will be providing support to teachers to award grades. Can he tell me when they'll receive the support, what form it will take, and confirm that it will be available in all schools? And can he tell me exactly what will be done to ensure that all grades are fair, consistent, and support pupils to move on in their education or employment? I heard what he said about technical and vocational exams. But frankly, he's failing to show leadership on the exams taking place in January. And he's leaving it simply to schools and colleges to decide what they should do in difficult circumstances. Will he now do the right thing and cancel this week's BTEC exams, as parents, colleges and the Association of Colleges are calling for? Mr. Speaker, staff in every part of our education system have faced a hugely challenging job and done extraordinary things to keep children safe and educated throughout the pandemic. Too often, though, the Secretary of State has refused to listen to their concerns or engage meaningfully with the expertise of professionals on the front line. He can start to make it up to them today. Is the JCVI working on a strategy to vaccinate all education staff, to keep them safe and get children back in the classroom? And does the Secretary of State believe that they should be prioritised for vaccination to keep them safe and allow schools and colleges to reopen? Early years settings remain open to all children, but the Secretary of State has failed to explain how this will be safe for staff and families. So can he tell us what scientific advice he's received that made him think they will be safe? And can he honestly say that he is following the science? And whether providers are open or closed, can he finally reconsider the unjustifiable decision to move early years funding in line with current occupancy, which will push tens of thousands of providers to the brink of collapse? Finally, Mr. Speaker, I turn to the return of schools in the months ahead. The decision to close them is not one taken easily or lightly. And while it is the right thing to do to control the virus and save lives, it has huge consequences for children's learning and development. And that's why Labour have always said that schools should be the last thing to close and the first to reopen. But yesterday, the Prime Minister couldn't guarantee that children would be back in school before the summer. Can the Secretary of State tell us when he expects children to be safely back in the classroom? Mr. Speaker, at every stage of this pandemic, young people have been an afterthought for the government. And now we're back where we were 9 months ago, with schools closed and exams cancelled. There is time to act, but the Secretary of State must act now to ensure all pupils can learn remotely, that families are supported, and the most vulnerable are safeguarded.
State.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd very much like to join with the Honourable Lady in paying tribute to Gareth. I had the great privilege of working with Gareth as his time as Deputy General Secretary of NASUWT, as well as his colleagues there, and very much our thoughts and prayers are with his family and also his friends and colleagues. The Honourable Lady raises a number of very important points. The rollout of digital devices, our commitment to deliver 1 million digital devices across the country. We'll be getting 750,000 of those devices out by the end of next week, supporting schools, delivering on their full allocation of devices that they need, and looking at how we can go further. It's been a great privilege to work with those brilliant teachers, inspiring leaders who and helped fund and support them in setting up the Oak National Academy, a brilliant online school that is actually being viewed not just right across this country but right across the world for the quality of teaching, and we want to see that used more and more as a vital teaching resource. The Honourable Lady is right to raise concerns about free school meals, how important this is for every one of our constituents. And that is why we're putting the funding and support in place, because there's many parts of the country where it will be best for those schools and they want to deliver those free school meals themselves. In other parts of the country, they won't be able to do that and will want to do it as part of a national voucher scheme. That is why we'll be standing that up over the next few days and making sure that schools are not out of pocket, but most importantly of all, that children and families are supported at this incredibly difficult time. And she asks about whether there'll be support for teachers in terms of the training and the guidance and the help across the country as we move to teacher-assessed grades, and I can absolutely confirm that that will very much be the case. We've always been aware that there could be a situation where we would not be in a position to be able to proceed with examinations. But we've always had a clear view that the best way of assessing children is through examination. So I will not apologise for being enthusiastic to ensure that we have been able to be in a position to roll out exams. But we do recognise where we are as a result of this pandemic, we have to take a different course, and that is why we're taking the route that we are. And the Honourable Lady raises about technical and vocational qualifications, and as the Honourable Lady will know, it's very important that we give colleges, schools and providers, all providers, including independent providers, training providers, the flexibility, because there's a lot of young people who will actually need to complete some of their professional competency qualifications in order to take up work and job opportunities, whether that is those who are doing electricians courses or gas courses, where they actually do have to do practical assessment in order for them to be able to get the qualifications to take the work and the jobs and the opportunities that we want to ensure that the door is kept open for them. So that is why we've taken the decision to give providers the discretion, because they will be the ones who best and most accurately understand the needs of their students and those who need those qualifications, possibly to be able to progress into a job that they wouldn't able to do if they didn't have that option. The issue of vaccination. The government has already set out the important need to vaccinate those who are most likely to be hospitalised, most likely to, if they catch this disease, to be the ones who will be not just hospitalised but most at risk of death. But like her, like everyone in the education community, I very much want to see all those who tirelessly every single day through the week and every week keeping schools open for those children of critical workers and vulnerable children, for making sure that when we people are getting vaccinated when schools are fully reopened again. But coupled with this is a really important step forward in terms of the mass testing programme that we've already started rolling out in schools. The mass testing programme in schools will be one of the largest testing programmes that this country has ever seen. It is ready to go, it is ready to be implemented, and it will be an important plank in ensuring that we can get schools opened at the earliest possible opportunity. And it won't surprise the Honourable Lady, but we do listen to the best scientific and public health advice in terms of the decision to keep early years open. we all have a clear understanding of how important early years education is for every child. And as I've always said, I will do everything I can do to keep every educational establishment open if that is possible and if it's the right thing to do. And when we were given the health advice that we could be in a position to keep early years open, it's so important, not just for those children themselves, but also for families. I felt that that was the right decision to do. I do not want to see any school closed for a moment longer than it has to be. That is why in June we all worked so hard and fought so hard to ensure that schools opened right across the country for primary years. That's why during June we did so much to ensure that years 10 and 12 were able to return to school at the earliest possible opportunity. That is why in September we saw the opening of schools right across the country and all children being able to return back to school. And I can absolutely assure the Honourable Lady, I will not let schools be open for a moment longer than they... I will not let schools be closed for a moment longer than they need to be. I will do everything I can to ensure every school is open so that children are able to benefit from the brilliant teaching that goes on in so many of our primary schools, secondary schools and our colleges. Because I know that is the best place for children. That's what I want for my children. I know that's what members want for their children. But most importantly, that is what we want for our nation's children. And that is why I will give everything in order to ensure schools are the first things to be opened in every instance. Because that is what is best for every one of our children.
We now go to the Chairman of the Select Committee, Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I strongly welcome the government's laptop scheme, but we know that there still will be possibly hundreds of thousands of people on the wrong side of the digital divide. Can my right honourable friend confirm that those students who just don't have internet connection or computers at home will be able to go to school alongside children of critical workers? Could he also confirm that any centre-assessed grade system will not only maintain standards but provide a level playing field for disadvantaged children, have a fair appeals process, and will he make sure that there are independent assessors, perhaps retired teachers or Ofsted inspectors, to provide a check and balance for each assessed grade awarded? And finally, I welcome what he has said about wanting to open schools again, and I know he believes that strongly. Will he do everything possible to ensure that teachers and support staff are given priority for vaccinations alongside NHS workers so we can get our schools open again sooner rather than later?
Well, the reason that we are rolling out and expanding our devices package, because we realise how important that is for all children, especially for those children from the most disadvantaged backgrounds. I can confirm that as in the previous situation where we saw schools had to be closed during the months of March, April and May, children who didn't have access to digital devices were able to access education in that school. Their background, community which they have grown up in and where they're learning in. And I'd be very happy and look forward to working with my right honourable friend and his committee to very much take their advice as to any additional actions that we need to undertake to ensure fairness. And we'll certainly take on board his idea and his thinking about bringing in those volunteers and those people who want to support education and making sure that the teacher assessment is fair and robust and maintains standards, but most importantly, fairness for those children who are taking those qualifications.
Now we go to the SNP spokesman, Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We shouldn't, of course, be surprised at this latest U-turn in schools. Any student teacher knows that planning is a key skill, but it's one that the Secretary of State has yet to master. His decisions are being made in a reactionary and last-minute manner. Schools in England have predictably gone from being open with threats of legal action if they closed to being snapped shut in an instant, giving parents absolutely no time to put in place arrangements. And a word to all members, we need to be careful about this narrative of children are falling behind. They're only falling behind on a scale, an external scale that we've defined for them. We cannot use the same metrics this year as we have used before. And of course, much as we all want schools to be open, young people are learning other skills too. That said, it's good to hear that the BBC is producing educational resources. Can he confirm whether there will be resources available for the Scottish curriculum at Nat 5 higher and advanced higher level? Teachers are fed up with politicians paying tribute to them 1 minute and the next minute sending them into unsafe environments. The risk posed to children in school is small. We have evidence for that. But as the Prime Minister said earlier, pupils can act as vectors. So, and let's be clear, if a member of staff in a school catches COVID, there's increased strain on the remaining staff. So it should not only be high-risk staff who are vaccinated. Before we talk about opening schools, we need a clear position on vaccinations for teachers and school staff. The First Minister has committed to looking at this. The Secretary of State has said he will do everything he can to ensure schools open. So will he ensure that teachers are a priority for vaccination so that schools can open with confidence? And finally, on students, there are many students who are now learning at home completely and are not returning to university following Christmas, but they're still having to pay for university accommodation. What support will the Secretary of State look at giving to these young people who are having to pay out in this manner?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's probably interesting listening to the Honourable Lady and her comments about students, and it's probably sort of indicative as to some of the challenges that the Scottish education system has seen with them falling down PISA rankings, because it is really important that we support children to be actually able to learn. It's really important that we do everything we can do to ensure that children are in a position where they're learning about maths and English and the sciences and the arts. It seems to be indicative of what she was saying, that the SNP doesn't seem to be that interested in actually making sure that children benefit from a knowledge-rich curriculum. I'd be happy to get in contact with the Director General of the British Broadcasting Corporation on the points that she raised, and I will write back to her with those details on that. And of course, it's always a privilege to work with colleagues across all nations of the United Kingdom, and it's really important that we share what works well and what works best. And of course, I would always be happy to work with her. We've extensively funded the Oak National Academy, which has an incredibly rich curriculum resource, and I noticed from the latest figures is used by a lot of students in Scotland as well as in England, and I'd be very happy to share some of the work that we're doing to help support students in Scotland as well as students in England as well.
Peter Aldous.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State for his statement. The economic recovery will be skills-based, and the government have quite rightly placed much emphasis on the importance of BTECs. However, there is currently worry, confusion and uncertainty in colleges and schools. Many have cancelled this month's exams, but others have not. They should not have been placed in a position of having to make their own choice as to whether to go ahead with exams. The government should have shown clear leadership so that all students across the country were in the same situation. Will the Secretary of State now work with Ofqual, the exams boards and the Association of Colleges to put in place as quickly as possible new arrangements that will provide students and teachers with certainty, clarity and confidence?
Well, as the Honourable Gentleman will have heard in my statement, that's exactly what I'd said we would do. But also, just for clarity, there are many students and there are many colleges that know for their students' future prospects that they need to complete those assessments during this month if they are going to be able to access work and employment opportunities. So no, I'm not going to go down the route that the Honourable Member suggests of actually taking that opportunity to potentially be able to access work and those opportunities away from them, because I do not believe that would be right for those children.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Teachers and school staff have put themselves at enormous risk during this pandemic in order to keep schools open. Now that the Prime Minister has accepted that schools are the epicentre of high community COVID transmission, it is essential that the government gives teachers and school staff the priority access to COVID vaccinations that they deserve. So will the Secretary of State look at adding them to Category 7, as this would make teachers and school staff a top priority for vaccinations after all those who are 65 years of age and over, all those who are clinically vulnerable and our NHS and social care staff?
Well, at every stage, we have put the safety of students, of pupils, of teachers, of the whole workforce, and including the whole community, at the heart of everything we've done. And all the evidence has gone to show that the work, the precautions, the measures that have been put in place has meant that schools have been able to operate safely and well. But we will constantly work with the whole sector to ensure every measure is undertaken to ensure that that continues. That is why we're ready to roll out a mass testing programme, delivering millions of tests right across the board. This will be happening in schools as they welcome the children of critical workers as well as vulnerable children into them. But when schools fully return, when they're able to welcome all children back, the testing regime is going to be at the centre of that return.
Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I understand why there is a cancellation of GCSEs and A-levels. And I'm pleased to hear him talking about in the substitute system, it will be robust and fair. But what can you do to confirm for the young people of Hinckley and Bosworth that students will be rewarded for how they perform, that they're not disadvantaged by the school they've gone to, and also the teachers who are performing these assessments have buy-in and ownership of what they are doing in the current situation?
My honourable friend raises a really important point, and the great advantage that we do have is we have the opportunity and the time to roll out extensive training, guidance and support for those teachers in terms of making that assessment to ensure that it is accurate and fair and reflective of the abilities of that child. That is what we're going to be doing. That is what we're going to be undertaking with schools over the coming months, and we endeavour to ensure that teachers and all those working in the education system are supported in his constituency as they are right across the country.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It was irresponsible of the government to announce the cancellation of GCSE and A-level exams and to say nothing about BTEC exams without any details of an alternative plan being agreed. Students and their families in Luton South have already suffered greatly over the last 9 months and are deeply anxious about this continued uncertainty that's been created. Many students have contacted me to say they are suffering negative impacts on their mental health as a result. So I would ask the Secretary of State what plans he has to provide additional mental health support for our children and young people.
Well, of course, one of the great advantages that we've had with schools being back all the way through the latter half of last year is actually teachers and those working in schools have been in the best possible place to assess and work with children and have the best understanding of some of their needs and some of the problems that they have, including mental health challenges, and we'll be working with the education sector to best support them in terms of actually supporting. We've already taken a number of actions supporting schools and education settings with children who have been suffering mental health problems as a result of COVID and as a result of being out of school, and we'll continue to do that and step up those measures over the coming months.
Marco Longhi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State not just for the statement he has made, but also for the huge effort he must be putting in trying to balance conflicting priorities. So as a father to an A-level student who was hoping to take her exams this year, I can relate to the anxiety so many young people and their parents must feel in Dudley North and across the country due to the uncertainty of the situation. Can my right honourable friend assure me that he will make every effort to remove this uncertainty by bringing clarity at the earliest opportunity so students can better focus on their studies and teaching staff on the best approach to support them?
As my own daughter, who is was due to be taking her own GCSE exams later on this year, I can absolutely assure my honourable friend that I very much hope the statement today has given a clear sense of certainty and direction of where we're going. We will also be following this up with further detailed consultation by Ofqual that will be launched next week. It will be a 2-week consultation period that Ofqual will be leading, and it's very important that we do get feedback from the sector in order to be able to ensure that the details of this policy are properly understood and work best, not just for schools and colleges, but most importantly for those who are receiving the grades.
Mike Amesbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given that the company Computer Centre awarded the £96 million contract with no deliver all the laptop kits to vulnerable children in the first lockdown, why is the Secretary of State sticking with Tory party donors from this company this time?
Well, I'd like to take the opportunity to pay tribute to Computer Centre, who've done an amazing job of distributing hundreds of thousands of devices right across the country. The Honourable Gentleman is right to say that we did a direct award on the first contract, as Computer Centre were one of the few businesses that were in a position to be able to assist us at that time, but since then tenders have gone out and Computer Centre have won those tenders through fair competition.
Kevin Hollenrigg.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Some North Yorkshire schools are operating a full formal timetable with checks and balances, including roll calls and marking, but some schools are not. Does my right honourable friend agree that all schools should use this kind of best practice to make sure students work as hard and as effectively remotely as they do when they physically attend school?
Well, as a former North Yorkshire County Councillor and having been on the Education Committee of North Yorkshire County Council, I absolutely do agree with my honourable friend. It's absolutely vital that we keep as much formal education in place as possible. Schools have moved forward in absolute leaps and bounds in the offer that they are able to put there. But we do recognise there has been variability, and that is why we've taken the actions that we have, including the actions that we will take with Ofsted to ensure that there is good, high-quality remote education delivered in all of our schools right across the country.
Paula Barker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to place on record my thanks to the National Education Union and Unison for the work they've been doing to keep school staff and pupils safe. In my constituency of Liverpool Wavertree, I've been inundated with enquiries from worried parents and nursery staff about nurseries remaining open and the risk that poses, particularly when elderly grandparents are often used to pick up children as part of support bubbles. And I'm afraid the narrative from the Secretary of State that this group are least at risk is not enough and doesn't instil confidence. So will the Secretary of State fully explain to my constituents why nurseries and early years settings are not closing, with the exception of providing services to key worker children?
Well, early evidence from SAGE has showed that early years provision had a smaller relative impact on transmission rates than primary schools, which in turn had a smaller relative impact than secondary schools. So that is why the decision was taken. And the Honourable lady mentions the National Education Union, and I'd like to thank both National Education Union and Unison for recognising the fact that the action that they took and the advice that they gave their members on Sunday was incorrect, and that they have withdrawn that advice. It was the wrong advice, and I'm glad that they have reflected upon it and recognised it was the wrong advice.
Tim Lawson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Ministers will know how bitterly disappointed I was when schools were so abruptly closed because of the impact on mental health, the attainment gap and safeguarding. So to give certainty and to enable schools to plan ahead, will the Secretary of State make the February half-term the default target date for return, barring any new crisis? And for those schools remaining open for key workers and vulnerable children, can we make sure that this time they are not turning away for, children on EHC plans, in particular on the basis that schools couldn't safely look after them, as I'm already hearing complaints from parents that their children who are entitled to attend are being placed on waiting lists?
My honourable friend is absolutely right to point out that children on an EHC plan are entitled and should be allowed into school and receive that care and support that school provides those incredibly important children. So absolutely, categorically make that totally clear to all schools and to all colleges as well. I would like to see schools open tomorrow, as my right honourable friend would know. I never want to see schools in a position where they're not able to welcome children, but we have had to take this incredibly difficult decision. I want to see all schools opening on the 22nd of February, but we obviously do have to take into account the scientific and health advice. But certainly, from a department's point of view and from a schooling point of view, every one of us is working towards welcoming all children back on the 22nd of February, but we obviously continue to have to listen to the advice of both the scientific and public health community as to how we continue to beat this virus.
Sarah Olney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State has made a timely decision to scrap GCSEs, AS levels and A levels, and I very much hope that we can avoid the heartache that some of my constituents suffered last year when their algorithm-adjusted grades caused them to miss out on university places that they had worked so hard for. This year, since exams are not being sat or needing to be marked, there is no need to delay announcement of grades until August. An earlier announcement will help students and parents to plan their next steps, universities to manage a fair admissions process, and will also leave time for appeals and resits. So will the Secretary of State, in his discussions with Ofqual, consider bringing forward the date at which assessment grades are released?
I think the Honourable Lady raises an important point, and it's something that I've already raised in discussions with Ofqual. We obviously have to make that judgment call in line with the whole system, and we don't want the the whole system of awarding to be dictated by the date where youngsters get their grades, but it will be one of those issues that are in active consideration, because, as the Honourable Lady says, it gives students more time if there is a need for appeals, and also gives them more time to make the best choices for them and for their future.
Andrew Rossendale.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State should know of the incredible dedication and self-sacrifice shown by teachers and staff throughout Romford and Havering since the start of this pandemic. Their determination to reorganise the schools to keep everyone safe and continue to provide the highest standard of education must be commended. But with schools now closing as part of the lockdown, they will have to do everything they can to move classes for the majority of students online to minimise the impact on their education. However, as in-person teaching will still be going ahead for vulnerable children and the children of critical workers, would my right honourable friend please clarify whether only one parent or both need to be critical workers in order for their children to continue to attend school in person?
Well, I'd very much like to join my honourable friend in paying tribute to not just the teachers in Romford, but all those support staff who open up the schools, welcome the children, as such an important part of the fabric of that school community. So very much like to join him in that. And in answer directly to his question, it is one parent who is, if they're a critical worker, it's deemed that they would have access to that school place for their child.
Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Many of my university student constituents have contacted me because they're desperately worried about the impact COVID restrictions are having on their learning, on their research, their educational success, their future careers, their finances, and their mental health and well-being. Does the Secretary of State believe it's fair for them to continue to be paying full fees and full rent when they aren't receiving the university experience they expected? And what will he do to support those students, especially those facing financial hardship?
The Honourable Lady will probably be aware that just before Christmas, the government announced additional support for students at universities in terms of an extra package to help those youngsters that are most vulnerable, and we'll continue to work with the sector to look at how best we can support students and the sector as a whole.
Jonathan Gullis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I can't hide my disappointment and sadness to see school gates closed to so many students from across Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Tork. Remote learning has many challenges, from unsuitable learning environments to no online connectivity and not having the necessary digital devices. So will my right honourable friend continue discussions with me and the Minister for School Standards in order to get textbooks distributed to pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds so they don't fall victim to the digital divide whilst learning remotely?
Well, I've asked officials to organise a meeting between my honourable friend, the Minister for School Standards, and myself for next week in order to be able to discuss this. We all recognise what an important role textbooks play in terms of helping and supporting learning, and actually some of the brilliant work and investment that has been made in terms of producing exceptionally high quality material in textbooks. And I look forward to meeting him next week to discuss ideas about how we can get this distributed, especially into some of the communities that are most disadvantaged across our country.
Paul Blomfield.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I say that I welcome the Secretary of State's U-turn on GCSEs and A-levels, late though it was, adding to the pressure on schools and teachers. I'm sorry, though, that his approach on BTECs appears to be an afterthought and an abdication of responsibility. But can I ask him about primary assessments? Because does he accept that proceeding with SATs this year would place an unnecessary and pointless burden on schools? And will he take action to cancel this year's tests and to do so in good time?
I always enjoyed working with the honourable member in terms of our work that we did with Motor Neuron Diseases Association over a number of years, and I always learned that he often speaks a lot of good sense, just sadly in the wrong party. Madam Deputy Speaker, can absolutely confirm that that we won't be proceeding with SATs this year. We do recognise that this will be an additional burden on schools, and it's very important that we're very much focused on welcoming students back into the classroom at the very earliest opportunity.
Greg Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I very much commend my right honourable friend for the work being done to roll out online learning, but for a significant proportion of my constituents, there's a small practical problem that up to 13% of households either have very slow or no access to broadband at all, and mobile data is also non-existent in many villages. So what practical support can my right honourable friend offer for those pupils living in such households, competing against other members of the household trying to work or learn with no or little broadband?
This is an incredibly challenging problem for many people living in rural communities, and I'd be very happy to meet with my honourable friend to discuss as to what further measures that we could take. I'm beginning to think that some of the additional resource of textbooks and other resources that can be maybe made available to families and communities which have these acute problems, and it isn't something that we're going to be able to work around in terms of a technical solution, that there may be other routes forward. But I will ask my department to organise swiftly a meeting between himself and myself to discuss this issue and any other educational issues in his constituency.
Dr. Lisa Cameron. If we have a problem there, we'll go back to Lisa Cameron and meanwhile go to Claudia Webb.
Thank you, Madam Deputy. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The pandemic has highlighted the injustice of tuition fees. Students are incurring on average of 57,000 worth of debts to be isolated in university halls and be restricted to online learning. Yet even beyond this, education must be a universal right, not a costly privilege. The last decade of extortionate tuition fees have saddled young people with debt, deterred working class people from gaining a higher education, and reduced our universities to profit-seeking businesses. Will the government take this opportunity to support students by refunding rents, scrapping tuition fees and cancelling student debt for good?
Well, the statistics would actually bear out something rather different to what the Honourable Lady said. We've seen a massive expansion of the university sector, with more young people going to university than ever before. But also, if the Honourable Lady took the time to look at the statistics and the facts, as against maybe just, not basing her question on the statistics or facts, she would actually discover there's more children from the most disadvantaged families going to university, often for the first time in that family, than ever before. That's something this party should feel incredibly proud of, and I would like to see even more youngsters from the most deprived backgrounds going to some of our best universities in the country.
We'll go back to Dr. Lisa Cameron.
Many thanks, Madam Deputy Speaker. Dr. Adrian James, President of the Royal College of Psychiatry, has now described the COVID-19 pandemic as the greatest threat to mental health since the Second World War. As chair of the Health All-Party Parliamentary Group, I've been receiving concerned emails from parents right across the United Kingdom regarding mental health. So given that children have experienced isolation, trauma, and for many bereavement, will the Secretary of State now take the opportunity to announce ring-fenced funding for a much-needed mental health and wellbeing strategy for children?
Well, I'd like to thank the Honourable Lady for raising such an incredibly important point, and it would be a great opportunity to meet up with herself and other members of the all-party parliamentary group to maybe actually discuss some of these wider issues that we don't just face in schools in England, but of course face schools across the whole of the United Kingdom. And there's been various different initiatives, some UK-wide for the higher education sector that universities have done so much on, but also initiatives in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And it'd be really good to have a four nations approach about how we support young people with the real challenges of mental health. And I look forward to having that discussion with her, because I know that she feels passionately about this issue, as so many members of this House do. And it's very much a cross-party issue. And I very much hope that we can find some cross-party solutions on how we can best support our young people.
Bob Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Happy New Year to you. Could I ask my right honourable friend about early learning? The Honourable Lady for Liverpool Wavertree has already raised the point, but I would rather like my right honourable friend to explain why in Bromley early learning centres, semi-schools really, are still open. And they have a real problem because all of them are privatised and there's a certain loss of income too. So it is a problem. So could I ask my right honourable friend, not that I dispute what he's going to say, could I ask for an explanation of why these places are open when primary schools are not?
Well, at every stage, I'd like to assure my honourable friend that at every stage we'll go above and beyond to keep education settings open. The Prime Minister has, Madam Deputy Speaker, many times outlined the government's commitment and priority of education. So if we're able to keep a sector of the education system open, because we know such enormous benefits are accrued, not just to the children that are in, whether it's a nursery, early years setting, or whether it's in the classroom in a primary school or secondary school, are so incredibly great. But it's also incredibly important for parents as well, and to families who often rely on those nurseries and those early years settings as well as schools in terms of supporting them. So when the advice came through, and just to reiterate it, that the early evidence from SAGE showed that early years provision had a smaller relatively impact, much smaller relative impact on transmission rates in primary schools, which again had a much lower relative transmission impact than secondary schools. We felt that it was the right thing to do, because it isn't, yes, it's about supporting the children, but it's also about supporting the families as well.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We all want children back in school as soon as possible, so why don't we work together to try and make that happen? With that in mind, could the Secretary of State tell me when he last met teachers' unions and what practical steps he agreed with them that the department would take? For example, acquiring more space for schools so that children and teachers can spread out. What steps did he agree to make schools even safer so that we can get children back in school as quickly as possible?
I think the Honourable Lady is absolutely right. I think where there is a shared commitment to see schools open, it's really important to work together. And I regularly meet, lots of organisations, including trade unions, on a very regular basis. I'm afraid nowadays we don't get to meet physically, and of course it is all online, but we have regular meetings, and I only just in the last week have had the opportunity to speak with a number of union leaders.
Gagan Mohindra.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Happy New Year to you and everyone else at the House. For those students due to have sat GCSEs, ASs and A-levels later this year, we've had to make the difficult decision to cancel the exams, which will undoubtedly cause a great deal of anxiety. Can my right honourable friend assure me and the House that his department will make every effort to provide them with the vital clarity they will need in the weeks ahead?
Well, I know that my honourable friend has been sort of a great champion in terms of defending his schools and actually doing everything he can do to ensure that parents in his constituency benefit from being able to have access to their schools. But he raises an important point about the clarity. I hope that what we have set out today brings a lot of clarity for further detailed consultation that Ofqual will be rolling out. The early part of next week will be the next stage in terms of consulting schools as to these next steps. And we recognise that when that is fully completed, it's really important that we're supporting schools, the teaching profession, and of course colleges and lecturers in terms of those next steps in the awarding of grades in summer for A-levels and GCSEs and other vocational and technical qualifications as well.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Despite serious safety concerns, we're told that BTECs were still going ahead yesterday, only to be told late last night that it was simply up to schools and colleges to decide if it was safe or not. The Secretary ignored education unions and organisations when they repeatedly told him it wasn't safe to fully open schools, colleges and nurseries on Monday. And nurseries are still open in full today, despite widespread anger and disbelief from the sector, nor any robust scientific evidence from the Secretary today that nurseries will not act as a vector for transmission of the virus. Safety is the Secretary's responsibility. Up to 1 in 50 now have the virus and the number continues to climb. So will he actually listen now to education unions and organisations, cancel BTEC exams, urgently take the same safety approach on nurseries that he has with schools and provide upgraded risk assessment guidance and vaccine access to all settings currently open to vulnerable and key worker children?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, can I just say what a delight it is to have the Honourable Member for Stretford and Urmston as Shadow Secretary of State, because at least she seems to be enthusiastic about actually having children in schools, colleges and other settings, unlike the previous Shadow Secretary of State. You know, at every stage, and I think the Honourable Lady understands this, is that we have put the safety and the security of children and the workforce at the very heart of what we do. As the Chief Medical Officers, not just of England, but Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland have said that actually the best place for children is in school. But we have had to take unprecedented action as a result of the Chief Medical Officer for England advising the fact that this nation has, we have to move to a COVID alert level 5. And when that decision was taken on Monday to move to COVID alert level 5, it was right that additional actions were taken as reluctantly as, as reluctant as I was to see us being in that position. But at every stage, and I think it is a little unfair of the Honourable Lady to imply that the safety and security of staff and children aren't at the heart of all our actions, because it is at the heart of all our actions. But we do know that children benefit from being in school. We do know that children benefit from having the opportunity to sit in front of their teacher in the classroom. So that's why, on this side of the House, we've always been so enthusiastic for schools to have children in, and I hope eventually she'll become a convert to that idea herself, as her successor has.
Joy Morrissey.
Madam Deputy Speaker, last year the approach to GCSEs and A-levels meant that private candidates such as home-educated children were unable to obtain a grade. Can my right honourable friend confirm that this year they will be able to do so?
I know that my honourable friend will be speaking not just for many of her constituents in the question that she asked, but actually for many thousands of youngsters right across the country who will be really worried about this. I have asked Ofqual to take up this issue, to look at it directly and to make sure that there are measures in place so that those students are going to be in a position where they're able to be in a place where they're able to get a grade. I've asked Ofqual to include it as part of their consultation, which they'll be doing next week, and we've already discussed as to how this can be done and believe that it will be possible to do so.
Alex Norris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State clearly prefers testing rather than vaccination as the means to making sure our teachers and learners will be safe when schools can reopen. Now, the Prime Minister wants that to happen in 6 or 7 weeks' time. To have an adequate testing regime in every school by that period will require working round the clock, every minute available between now and then. So the Secretary of State confirms to me that every school in my constituency has the access to the support they need to make sure that such a regime will be in place in time.
So we've already seen the mass distribution of testing kits and all the equipment that is required in schools and colleges where they're taking years 7 and above. We will be looking at how we can roll out testing beyond secondary schools into primary settings and those earlier years to support staff as well. But actually, I think the honourable gentleman may sort of, I'm as enthusiastic about vaccination as he is, but we're very much forward with our programme in terms of mass testing for children, with all secondary schools receiving the initial deliveries and all schools will be getting that level of support in secondary settings, and we're looking at expanding that in primary settings as well, and that would include all his schools in his constituency as well as all of our constituencies.
Order. I appreciate that the Secretary of State is giving thorough and detailed answers to a great many questions, but we've already taken up more than an hour, considerably more than an hour in the statement. I still have 13 more people to participate, and I would like to give everyone the chance to ask their question, but I must ask them to not make speeches or statements, just ask a question, and if it's a short question, then the Secretary of State will be able to give quite a short answer. Anne-Marie Morris.
Madam Deputy Speaker, Secretary of State, the future of the country is very much in your hands. Children are our future, and I'd like to pay tribute to my local schools who have risen to the challenge and continue to deliver an exemplary education. But closing schools is one thing. What is your plan to open them? What are your criteria? It can't be ending lockdown given the devastating effect on children's mental health. What is your vision and your plan for optimising children's life chances and giving a clear map of the future for children, parents, teachers, universities, employers? What, in your eyes, does good look like?
Order, order. So I did ask the Honourable Lady not to make a speech but to ask a question. She's asked several questions which I'm sure the Secretary of State will answer, but I must insist that while we have virtual proceedings in this chamber, that people who are participating virtually adhere to the same rules that we adhere to in this chamber. Nobody calls the Secretary of State you. You means the chair. The Secretary of State is the right honourable gentleman. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, I'll endeavour to be very brief. My honourable friend is right to pay tribute to all those who work in schools and colleges and nurseries in Newton Abbot, and I'd like to add my thanks to the work that they do. We've been clear that the testing regime is a key element of opening schools back once more. We do rely on the pressure that currently the NHS is feeling to start to be lifted. That is one of the key reasons as to why we had to take the difficult and unpalatable decision to close schools.
Janet Davey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've been contacted by a distraught young lady from my constituency. She works full-time. She's a private candidate studying for her A-levels. With exams now cancelled, students in standard schooling will have predicted grade assessments from their teachers, but self-taught students will have no such thing. Last year, thousands of private A-level candidates went without any grade when their exams were cancelled. Will the Secretary of State work with Exam Board to make provision for self-taught students to do what is necessary to make sure students like my constituents are not overlooked and to ensure that their money, time and studying really does pay off?
I certainly will do that. We've already had those discussions with Ofqual and will in turn with Exam Boards, and I'd like to refer the Honourable Lady to the comments I made to the Honourable Member for Beaconsfield.
Simon Fell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As someone who was campaigning to keep schools open until a few days ago, I recognise how difficult these decisions have been for my right honourable friend. But if I could press him on 2 points. First, I know my right honourable friend's made his views on vaccination in schools clear, but could I implore him to look again at vaccination for SEN schools, where the line between teaching and caring is very blurred indeed? And secondly, could my right honourable friend review catch-up funding for schools, especially for areas of deprivation, to make sure that it's targeted so that the attainment gap doesn't widen as a result of this lockdown?
Both my honourable friend and myself were both championing the importance of keeping all schools open at every stage, and I very much thank him for his support. I do spy in the distance the Health Secretary, who is obviously progressing slowly to the chamber, and I can absolutely guarantee that I'll be making those arguments as forcibly as possible about the important need, recognising those children who are in special schools. And that workforce is often a crossover between education and care. But we'll be making those arguments, but also recognising the broad clinical requirements that the Department for Health have to operate under. But I'll certainly echo those comments with the Health Secretary.
Order. I allowed the honourable gentleman for Barrow, in fairness, 2 questions because I couldn't get in quickly enough to stop the second one. From now on, 1 question, no speeches, no statements. Bill Esterson.
Poll suggests as many as 1.78 million children don't have access to a computer. What the Education Secretary has announced today suggests a 10% reduction in those numbers by the end of next week, which still leaves 1.6 million children unable to access a computer. Bridging the digital divide is essential. So when are that 1.6 million going to receive their laptops and the 900,000 children who don't have data access as well?
Well, I'd just like to refer the Honourable Gentleman to my statement earlier, which covered most of the points that he raised in his question.
Miriam Cates.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know my right honourable friend did everything he could to keep schools open and that he shares my concern for the welfare of the hundreds of thousands of young people now isolated at home. Can I ask my right honourable friend to look urgently at the reports of harms being caused to children by social isolation?
Absolutely. It's incredibly, the impact of social isolation has a real impact on young people. Children are the ones who just miss out so much with not just being in school to have the input of their teacher, but also their friends and that socialisation that comes with it. And always happy to meet with my honourable friend to discuss this and what more that we can be doing to support schools, support teachers and support the education community to support our children.
Patrick Grady.
Madam Deputy Speaker, where and when will families be able to find out exactly what free services the mobile operators are providing, and how will he make sure that that's as straightforward as possible to access? And is he making sure that the devolved governments are fully looped in on this and that they'll get any Barnett consequentials of additional spending on laptop and tablet distribution?
Well, of course, we'll always work closely with the devolved governments, and it's obviously the benefits of a union are demonstrated about the fact that actually we're able to work together and also work at considerable scale in order to deliver benefits to all parents and children. Obviously, any additional spend on anything has Barnet consequentials, which means that again, Scotland benefits from being in the United Kingdom and the financial support that the whole UK gains from being together.
Jerome Mayhew.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I know from my own children that a live lesson taught online is much more effective than learning resources being placed online. Whilst teachers always need to be able to use their discretion to take account of specific circumstances, can my right honourable friend assure me that the default expectation during this lockdown is for online live teaching?
Well, we've already set out really detailed guidance for all schools about setting the expectation levels for all schools and what they're providing pupils. We do recognise that there will be a blend in terms of a range of different teaching, but we have set the expectations there clearly, and where schools fall below it, there is recourse that parents can take either with the school directly or ultimately through Ofsted.
Mary Kelly-Foy.
Speaker, as students have been advised not to return to university for the foreseeable future, most will be left paying for accommodation that they cannot use. It's clearly unfair that students renting private accommodation will be left thousands of pounds out of pocket, and the government's miserly £20 million contribution to the University Hardship Fund obviously isn't enough. Does the Education Secretary agree that the government has a responsibility to refund students their accommodation costs?
Well, as I've already sort of set out, the government before Christmas recognised the need to give additional support to students and through universities. That's why we put the additional financial arrangements in place to support them.
Lucy Allen.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to put on record my thanks to all the teachers and support workers in Telford. My single question, my right honourable friend, does he agree with me that just handing out laptops is no substitute for the support and guidance a child receives from a dedicated, committed teacher? Will he do everything in his power to enable teachers to return to school, including considering vaccinations?
Well, I would very much like to add my thanks to all the teachers in Telford, especially as one of my daughters is very privileged to be able to get benefit from those teachers in her constituency. I'd very much like to echo her point that actually supporting children in terms of learning isn't just about giving them a device, it's how that device is used, how that child is supported, and the work that we've undertaken over the last few months to support that in terms of Oak National Academy. Resources that are available are an important part of that. And in terms of vaccinations, in terms of testing, we'll always be pushing at the boundaries to maximise this for our education settings right across the country.
Mohammed Yasin.
Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State has placed the decision about whether to maintain nursery schools on governing boards. Will he make public health a priority and guarantee full funding during this crisis to relieve boards like the Bedford Nursery Schools Federation of the feeling of being coerced into remaining open to protect their future viability?
Well, we recognise there's a lot of nursery schools who want to be in a position to be able to open their doors, and if I can refer the Honourable Gentleman to the answers I gave earlier in this session about the reasons as to why we took that decision.
Peter Bone.
The Secretary of State for updating the House and answering the question so fully. Could he tell me, if a university student has travelled back to their halls of residence and now is going to receive remote learning, should they stay at university or should they return home?
We would encourage that university students to stay as to where they are in order to be able to conduct their remote